Ladies and gents, welcome to the live show. Hey, if this is your first time here, every Friday I do a live show. If you're very new to the channel, every day, every morning, I do news stories about things that I figured mattered to me, or I think that matter in Canada or around the world. Nonetheless, I do news stories every day. Welcome to the channel. This is Clyde Do Something. And every Friday we do a live stream. We do a live stream to get tune in with the audience, catch up on some of the things we didn't entirely catch up on. There's so much to go over and so little time to do all of it. Of course, I work a 9 to 5, so I also have that to deal with on top of making videos. So I get what I can out as much as I possibly can, and then and then we just move on from there. So keeping up with all of this stuff, this is what it's all about. Let's bring the chat in. Hey, chat, come on in. Welcome. Howdy from Texas, Clyde. Michael, I'll be your neighbor in no time soon. But no, until then, I'm still here in Canada. Hey, bud, love the show. Keep talking for Canada. I'm not going to stop talking for Canada. Absolutely. Even when I end up down in the South, I will still be talking about Canada. CRP tribute, fellow mechanic here, Clyde. Listen from Camp McMurray. No way. You're in Fort McMoney. Nice. Hey, say hey to all the people out in camp for me. Great place to definitely make a living. That's for sure. No doubt about that. But hey, welcome. It's creepy. What's this? What? Where did that go? It's is it creepy if I follow you to Texas? No, not at all. It just depends on how closely. But yeah, no, do what you got to do. We all got to do what we got to do to survive. Sadly, leaving Canada. Anne, are you leaving Canada, or are you talking about sadly? I will be. Yeah, I mean, I'll sadly be leaving Canada, but I'm not leaving Canada behind. That's the whole motivation here, and that's what my goal is to accomplish anyway. Evening, Clyde. Evening, Jason. I'm moving south to South Dakota. I need to. Why is this cut off? Let me fix that. Everything seems to be getting cut off in the chat. It's or is it? No, it's not really. I'm just seeing it kind of weird because I'm looking at it with that. There we go. I fixed it. That's a lot better. Hey, Clyde, Alaska loves us. We're going. Okay, that sounds great. Hey, Clyde. Yeah, absolutely. Get on over there if you can. It's not that far if you're in the Yukon. Absolutely. Damn, everyone jumping ship. There's a lot of people. Absolutely. And I don't blame a lot of people, but obviously keep up the fight, because we don't have to be there to continue the fight. But there are so many people that are there that are still fighting. I know guests that I have tonight, they're not going anywhere and they're fighting massive. Tonight, Jeffrey Rath, he's been on the show before. He's a lawyer. He's been fighting the government for so many years. And he's actually going after the provincial government as well as the federal government in Alberta. And yeah, we're going to be talking about that tonight. Sounds happening over here. Someone hit the print button on the printer. Yeah, and also Marty up north is going to be joining. You see him every Thursday morning, but you get to see it. There'll be a little extra. I like a little extra this week. No complaints here. Love having Marty here all the time. Hi from Quebec. Hi, Quebec. How you doing? Rick Lab. Why you moving away? You got a job in the U.S.? I'll have something lined up. No, it's because of the rental situation in British Columbia. It's crazy, and we got evicted from our place, my family. So we got evicted because the landlord wanted to renovate, and I'm still not sure what he's doing. We're keeping an eye on the place to see what he ends up doing, but not sure if he'll sell or try to rent it out again. But yes, rent has gone up by about $20,000 this year. So yeah, let's just say that that's not really in the affordability camp. unfortunately. But I'll be here to vote in the election, as well as voting in future elections. No doubt about that. Mechanics. Clyde, when are you going to have Frank Vaughn on the show? When am I going to have Frank Vaughn? Who's Frank Vaughn? I want to look that up now. You got me curious. Frank Vaughn. Who's that? Somebody, please tell me who that is. Because I'm sure currently I don't know. So let me look this up. Hold on. Who is Frank Vaughn and why should I have him on the show? Because Frankie Vaughn. No, that's IMDb. No, hold on. You have to tell me who this is. I indicted years ago that Maxime Bernier and his headquarters crew. What? PPC. Oh, okay. Hello, fellow Clydesters, says Steve's Hyde. When am I going to have Frank Vaughn on the show? Let me find out who he is and then get on that. Well, apparently I'm following him, and he follows me. So yeah, let's make this happen. Okay, I've got his page open. So yeah, I'd be happy to. The more of these conversations we can have, the better. I'm absolutely all about that. He looks like is he a PPC candidate or just a he's a YouTube commentator. Okay, don't want to get nailed with copyright for musics that happen on there. But yeah, I'll check him out for sure. And then let's get him on for a conversation. Why not? I'm totally down for that. Yeah, that would be great. I followed him start of COVID. Okay, cool. People Party of Canada candidate. Oh, he's a candidate and a YouTuber. Another one of those. Fair enough. Kind of like Viva Fry, candidate and YouTuber, and now Florida Rumbler. Hello, Texas from Quebec. If you're saying hi to people in the chat from Texas, yeah. But I'm in beautiful British Columbia as it currently stands. But yeah, let's make that happen. To that. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why Jason still talks to that guy. Trudeau, yes. Trudeau is going to be getting sued. And that's what we wanted to get into in this. Jay, what is this? Let me pop this up. Sorry. Javelin Blue with a $10 super chat. Does your wife know any super hot Japanese women that are single? I don't know about any single ones. I guess they get taken up pretty quick. That's the way it is. But good luck to you, my friend. I hope nothing but the best for you on that pursuit. But yeah, that might be a tricky one. Yeah, I don't know. Does Trudeau know you? That's hilarious. PPC is as relevant as Green Party. Currently, currently the Green Party does have a seat. That is a thing. Woohoo, Clyde, you're late. I was late, but you're even later. That comment's coming up right now. Hot and single equals crazy. And back in Javelin Blue with another $10 super chat. Okay, thanks, man. Appreciate that. I definitely appreciate that. No, good luck with that. Yeah. I mean, my wife's Japanese. I absolutely love my wife. But I love my wife because she's her. I don't know if it's because anything to do with Japanese, but these are the quirks that she has about her. So let's get into some of this stuff because I'm excited to talk about this before my guests come in today. Because once they come in, we're going to be talking about suing the government, not just suing Trudeau. But Sean Rickard pointing this out on Twitter, as some of us predicted. Do it, Jordan Peterson. It should be a slam dunk. After all, he did make those egregious and slanderous fabricated accusations while under oath and on a live broadcast for the world to hear. Full story right here at the National Post, where they're saying Jordan Peterson says he is considering legal action after Trudeau accuses him of taking Russian money. Yeah, that's slanderous. You can't just go saying that individuals took Russian money when, especially when it's false. Michael Hostetler with a $10 super chat. Much love and respect from Texas, mate. Oh man, that's awesome. Thank you so much. What part of Texas are you from, brother? I know when we move down, we're gonna be heading to the Austin area. I think we're looking at Cedar Park or maybe even Leanne. How is it pronounced? Just the Cedar Park area. That's kind of the area that we're looking to move to. But yeah, let me know. Let me know. I can't wait to meet some other tradies down there. That's gonna be the first mission, of course, is to meet other people in your cohort. That's the way. That's what you do when you move to a new place, and that's exactly the plan. So let me know in the comments or in the chat whereabouts. Okay. Yeah, everybody else is talking. But yeah, let me know. I'll pop that up as soon as you say. But let's get back into this. Jordan Peterson, hold on a sec. As soon as I pop this back, then the chats come in. Michael Hostetler with another $2 super chat. It's Fort Worth area, brother. Okay, Fort Worth. The wife was looking at that and she was like him and Han. She might have wanted to move there. We're settling on the Austin area. But I mean, it's a drive. It's a drive. But I wouldn't mind meeting up and meeting some of the other fellow tradies in the local area for sure. So hit me up on Twitter and we can exchange info before I head out that way. That'd be really cool, actually. Absolutely. All right, let's get into this. Jordan Peterson says he's considering legal action after Trudeau accuses him of taking Russian money. Now, where was this? Where was this said? Obviously, the National Post is is writing stories about this, and many others are commenting about this. But Rebel News, Jordan Peterson retweeting Rebel News saying, "Hey Russians, where the hell is my money?" Justin Trudeau strikes again, whipping at a foul ball. Obviously, a foul ball here. But I'm gonna have to open this up in a different capacity because I'm using StreamYard today. But let me pop this open and get this on the thing because we just gotta see this. This is just amazing, amazing work from our amazing prime minister in Canada. Obviously, let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Oui, on a vu que des messages de
anti-vax
pendant le convoi et pendant la pandémie qui ont été amplifiés par la propagande russe, particulièrement dans les médias de droite.
Okay, so we were yes, we saw anti-vax messages during the convoy and during the pandemic that were amplified by Russian propaganda, and it's cutting in the middle of the screen. And what? Oh, I gotta love the text is down there, particularly right-wing media. I can just keep it off of French. These messages continued from the same people who shared anti-vax messages.
Sous les mêmes gens qui partageaient des messages anti-vax, maintenant pour dire que
now, not to say that we weren't people who were legitimately and authentically anti-vax in Canada, but it was greatly amplified by Russian propaganda. And once Ukraine was invaded, we saw many of these shift to pro-Putin propaganda. We see, and as I just mentioned, we recently saw RT is funding right-wing bloggers and YouTube personalities in North America.
Blogueurs et personnalités YouTube de droite
personality
en Amérique
YouTube.
du Nord,
Just say YouTube
y compris
personality,
des noms très, très
including
connus
well-known names like Jordan Peterson or Tucker Carlson to amplify messages that destabilize democracies. Now, that is absolutely false. Of course, that is totally false. Now, there were accusations, and this turned into an indictment against Lauren Chen, a Canadian, by the way, Canadian YouTuber. Wow, popping this all up in the wrong fashion. Let's get the chat back. So, Canadian YouTuber Lauren Chan, she was indicted, and I think this was a honeypot. This was absolutely a honeypot because it was the tenant media thing, and that blew up, and it turned into what was a lot of people making accusations of people who happened to be, brought into tenant media and paid for work that they already were working on. And this is why I think it's a honeypot. Mark Dice has been talking about this nonstop. He's probably done the best reporting on this story out of all the places. But yeah, like people who were roped into this, Dave Rubin, Tim Pool was roped into it, Lauren Southern, a number of other people on it. If I Matt Christensen, whom I followed for years, because there's the like skateboarder turn newscaster thing. I mean, I've got an affinity for that, obviously, for my own reasons. But yeah, like people like Tim Pool and Matt Christensen, obviously. Those guys, they fell into what I think is a honey trap. They're like offered a bunch of money to do exactly what it is that they were already doing. It turns out Lauren Chan was negotiating with these Russian nationals. It turns out through RT. I don't know any of the details. Again, Mark Dice, he's probably the expert on this one on YouTube to talk about it. That's not directly impacted by it, but and then Justin Trudeau is taking that and spinning it in a completely other direction, and completely further, and making the accusation saying that Tucker Carlson and Jordan Peterson were paid by Russia Today to do propaganda in Canada, in the world. What? Like, this is obviously Justin Trudeau talking out of probably not the usual orifice, but another one of the no, actually, would it be that one of his other usual orifices? Yeah, that's right. Justin Trudeau talking out of that one. Anyway, yeah, so here's the story again. Rebel News is saying Trudeau claims Jordan Peterson and American journalist Tucker Carlson are funded by Russian state broadcaster RT while testifying at Foreign Interference Commission. Now, this puts him right in line for lawsuits. And Cat Canada pointing this one out. Do we need to tap the sign? And of course, this is her tapping on the sign of like, this is where you do your apology tour now. This is where you make your apologies, because Cat Canada was accused of the exact same thing by Mark Gerritsen, and she threatened lawsuit. And Mark Gerritsen quickly, deleted those tweets, retracted the message, made an apology, and that's the direction it needs to go. Absolutely. We got Chris with a $20 super chat. Thank you so very much. If Trudeau is making accusations like that, then you can tell he's really cornered. This is what desperation looks like from someone who's really screwed up, and he doesn't have the intelligence to get out of it professionally. No, he's totally cornered on this one. Absolutely cornered. And now he's in for lawsuits. He's in lawsuit territory. Chris with another $5 super chat says, he might also be nervous about the way the election will go down in the States. Kamala doesn't have the support they are claiming she does. No, she doesn't. No, she doesn't. And now we're at the point where it's, I just have to share this tweet because I thought this was ridiculous, actually, considering it was coming from a Canadian YouTuber / personality individual. Where do I find that? I'm gonna have to go look at my 1 second. I gotta look at my timeline to find this one, because yeah, JJ McCullough. He's supposed to be right wing. He's supposed to be a conservative. He's got some really bad takes, in my opinion. I don't know how else to say this, but here we go. JJ McCullough replying to the GOP. This is a grand old party, the conservative, or sorry, the Republican Party in the United States, when they said make it too big to rig. Now it's getting to the point where Kamala's support is so little compared to Trump's support, it would be too hard for them to, like they said, rig it for Trump, or for Kamala in this case, as is being accused on the about the last election. Now it's funny because if anybody says the election's rigged, they immediately jump to say you're a conspiracy theorist and all this stuff. And this is what JJ McCullough is doing right here. He's such an anti-American liar. He's saying about Trump. Like, why does he continue to say shit like this? And I replied to JJ saying, this is actually the GOP saying this, so the Republican Party. Also, it's not anti-American sentiment to think that the other side might be cheating. Hell, the Clintons are still saying that Trump stole the 2016 election. It's unbelievable. But if they say it, it's a problem. But if Trump says it, it's a problem. Wait a second. What? That doesn't make sense. It can't be one way or the other. And why is JJ McCullough coming to the aid of the left on this one? Just beyond me. I'm not sure. I don't even know what brand of conservatism he claims to espouse to, but whatever. I'd love to have the conversation with him someday. It would be fantastic to have that opportunity to chat with him, because there are things I do agree with him on, and others that, holy cow, I do not. That's for sure. That's absolutely for sure. Let's get to some of these others before I get too far behind. Steve's Hyde, and I gotta reel this in a little bit so I can read it better. Steve's Hyde with a $5 super chat. The Russians want us to clean our room. I say we don't have to. Quote from Trudeau. We don't have to clean our room. No, yeah, Trudeau wouldn't like that. Obviously, it's not the Russians. It's Jordan Peterson that's saying clean your room. If you haven't read his book 12 Rules, I definitely recommend it. I think it was a great book. It was really, really well thought out, and it's not just some like generic self-help book or something like that. It's actually it was essays that were written over decades and then compiled and put together. So that's why it was such a great book. And I think everyone got really wrapped up in the lobster part, but read the rest of the book. It's really fantastic. Daifeichu with a $5 super chat says, my first thought was honeypot, but who cares if they get money from Russia? That's their business. Let's not let the Marxists set the discussion. I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if some anonymous character wants to give you a bunch of money, if you're none the wiser, there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, that's what the DOJ said when it came to all the other people that were involved in the accusations there. When it came to Tenant Media, when it came to Tim Pool, Lawrence Southern, all these other people, they actually wrote it explicitly in there that these people were they were unknowing of the origins of this cash. In fact, they were told that it was some philanthropist guy from Tennessee or somewhere in the U.S. in the South that wanted to give them a bunch of money, and that was the gist of it, and that's where that whole thing came from. So especially for someone like Tim Pool, he was just licensing out some of his content. He wasn't even making special content for it. He was taking parts of his live streams and he was just licensing it to them to put on their YouTube channel. And he was getting paid apparently handsomely for it. So that's why a lot of people like Mark Dice are calling it a honeypot, because it was just basically free money for some of these people that were put into it. That was to get them to come in and talk to the FBI and get caught up in a lie. Yeah, yeah. If you're ever questioned by the FBI, I think smart move would be say nothing, consult your lawyer, straight up. Especially in recent times, it seems like that seems to be the only MO for them to come to talk to you, is to get you caught up in something. We've seen that in recent years. Eileen Luck with a $6.99 super chat. Thank you so much for the tip. And no chat, just a redacted message. Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for the tip. I really appreciate that. That's fantastic. Now, tonight, I'm going to be bringing on some guests, and this is going to be fantastic because we're going to be talking about not just Jordan Peterson taking people to task, but Canadian citizens taking their own government to task. And this is where things get really, can we say frustrating, messy, all of the above. This is really the way things are going in Canada. But if we're going to hold our government to account, this is the process in which we do it. And I think it's unfair. I think it's lopsided. They have as much money as they and all the time in the world, unlimited coffers, which you pay for, by the way, you pay for. And this is the where it goes. But to talk about this tonight, first, my first guest to come in, you guys all know him. You see him once a week. Welcome to the stage, Marty up north. Welcome, my man.
Clyde, how's it going?
It's good. It's good. Been talking about this thing with Jordan Peterson, but we're gonna get into
and just before you get Jeff in here, I think the word you were looking for is daunting. Like any citizen who wants to take on the government, you're right. It's frustrating. It's long. It's tedious, but it's also daunting. Like I can't imagine, And anyways, we're going to get into it, but it's a daunting task.
Yeah, well, we'll see when Jeff comes. I told him the time frame, and I sent him out the link. Hopefully he gets everything going. But in the meantime, have you heard the news about Jordan Peterson and the accusation that was hurled at him by Justin Trudeau? Not every day I get to do two stories about Jordan Peterson. So I covered this morning how Jordan Peterson's been forced to do his re-education training, and he went all the way to the Supreme Court with this. All the way to the Supreme Court. And it turns out nobody has the balls to be the re-educator.
Yeah, I mean, would you, like, can you imagine? I mean, like, being a DEI coach is kind of a modern thing, right? It's I've heard of, like, I have friends who are in the oil industry and have had to go through the DEI training, and the DEI training is always by some, 20-something, 30-something young person, woke person putting on the coach, the training. Nobody who's 50 or 60 would be a DEI coach. So imagine some 35 or 25-year-old young person trying to coach Jordan Peterson. Like, that's not a fair match. Would you want to? I mean, I'd love to debate him in a fun environment, but if it became a very, very serious issue, a win-lose situation, you're outgunned by Jordan Peterson. I wouldn't want to debate Peterson.
So
on engineering.
The best part of the whole scenario is recently Matt Walsh came out with that new film, Am I Racist, where he becomes a DEI coach, and he goes out, and it's his journey of becoming a DEI coach. And what's prevalent across the board in every one of these scenarios is they have something on you. They have some sort of power over you, and then they have this ability to use coercion to get you to just go along with what they're saying. And what they generally have over you is your employment is relying on it. you'll lose your job if you don't do this. Some people are there for punishment. Some people are there just because this is required by your field or whatever. And so you can't speak back against them because they'll give you a bad score and then you might lose your job, right? So this is the compelled speech that they rely on. Now, Jordan Peterson has been unagreeable, let's say, to the least amount said, towards people compelling him to speak on subjects. Bill C-16, he's very, very outspoken about that. That's where everyone learned of who he even was as an educator.
That's
school,
how he,
right?
Yeah.
And then he went all the way,
which got mistaken, right? People thought that he initially people thought he was against pronouns and things like that, and he always said, no, I'm not against pronouns. If you ask me to say something to you and I agree to it, I will. But if you force me to, compel me to, that's where he drew the line, right? There was
absolutely
yeah.
And I mean, most people are they fall along the same lines. If somebody comes and they're very polite and you could tell that they're trying to pass as something that they aren't, but you're going to be polite. Okay, listen, ma'am, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And if you let it slip, oh, excuse me, sir, they should be polite on the other side because you're trying your damn hardest. And that's called polite society. But yeah, when they try to compel you to do things, that's when this goes against the fundamental principles of what we hold dear in the Western world. And that's why Jordan Peterson has been an advocate and a king contender. Like, he is Mike Tyson of free speech. Like, he really is. And if he was brought in, so now he's gone to the very top and he's still being forced to go in, anybody that they bring in against him, he's a heavyweight.
Well,
they've got nothing on him, is what I'm saying. They
got nothing on him. I mean,
now.
Well, they still have something on him, right? I mean, he doesn't. If they have him on principle. I mean, he's not going to give up on principle. Like, we've talked about this. I mean, he could say, "Screw you." I'm not going through your training, and he doesn't need his title. He doesn't need to be a psychologist anymore. He doesn't need to practice. He doesn't need the money. So he could, he's not being coerced that way. But for him, it's a principle. He doesn't want to give it up. It's the same as me. I mean, I'd be in the same boat. I love being called an engineer. I love my title of, professional engineer. And if my society threatened me, even though I don't work, I'd probably, I'd put up a fight. But anyways, I've seen that. I kind of, in a weird sense, I do hope he goes through the re-education because I want to see the video. Like, if he does, I want to be in the same class. Actually, I'm just going to be a quiet participant. I'm just going to be in the class there. Yeah, I need training. Can I be, oh my God, like, yeah.
And
then your other story was your other story was his lawsuit or his threatening lawsuit, right? I mean, he's being accused of being a Russian spy, and I mean, God, we're all. I've been accused of almost the same thing. So, yeah.
So I'm just sending this off to Jeff Rath because he asked me to send him the link by
mail by something other than Twitter. Yeah.
So,
I'm going to drink my Pilsner while you do that.
Yeah, so I'm sending that, but I wanted to share about one of the paragraphs from Jordan Peterson's before we move on to the other part, because it's absolutely hilarious. Let me just copy link here, send that over. Okay, cool. It's absolutely hilarious what he had to say in this article about specifically that, about people taking him on. So I'll pop open the article here, present this page. Sorry, I'm all clunky this evening about it. But yeah, so he goes on to say in this article, is this the part? Yeah. I'll also point out the sheer foolishness starting what is meant hypothetically to be a productive discussion with such an approach. Although as I intimated, it gets worse. Here's a hint. Boys and girls of the College of Psychologists and Behavior Therapists or analysis or whatever the hell you call yourselves now, don't begin a negotiation, particularly when you are already backed into a corner by insulting your would-be partner in play. In this particular case, more specifically, don't assume that the target of your offer is open to something approximating a bribe, because that is what it was, particularly when all the evidence suggests to the contrary. And he's talking about the bribe of him just like paying a fine and it all goes away. This is what they offered instead of him having to go through with this. But there was another part of the article where this is where he says it. The mark my words bit, because Jordan Peterson, when he I guess when he gets it in his head that he's gonna do something, I've lost my spot. It's a big long article, but anyway, what he did was he made an open threat, and he said, listen, to anybody who chooses to take this job, I'm going to be the guy you're going after. And I'm going to be doing this in the most public way possible. The whole idea is that everybody who complained about him did it anonymously, and they did it through the College of Psychologists. And that was all fine and dandy for them. But when he does this, he's going to do it in such a public way that he says, I'm warning you, nobody is prepared for the level of scrutiny and the level of infamy you're going to be thrust upon.
You better be your lessons better be perfect, your research better be perfect, your reasoning, everything you tell me better be perfect, because he's going to tweet about it, talk about it with Joe Rogan, write articles about it, put it as a chapter in his next book, and whoever that person's name is, it's either make or break. I'm sure that person will gain a little bit of celebrity in a small little circle of maybe their close friends and a few associates. But I wouldn't want to take on that. Like I said, in a very serious debate, I wouldn't want to take on Jordan Peterson. No thanks.
Well, and if they had any air of professional, notoriety going into it, it's all gone the second that they take that job. Because
actually, I wonder if there. Are there people like outside of Canada who would challenge Jordan in a pretty decent sort of debate on this kind of topic? Does anybody come to mind? I can't think of anybody like who. I mean, he's been on the monk. He's been on
not on DEI. On this.
Yeah.
So, like, I think that there are a lot of people that would take him on for a number of different subjects. Like, for example, his particular brand of religiosity. Some people argue with him with that, and they give good arguments, and they're giving true arguments is what I would say to that. Yeah. When it comes to DEI, there are no true arguments. And this is my contention with this. Because there are no true arguments, everything is sophistry when it comes to DEI. This is the tool that they use, and it's a single-edged sword. They have nothing else. And that's all that they rely on. It's either their compulsion because you're relying on it for your job, or they'll use sophistry, and some people are not equipped to deal with that. Jordan Peterson is not one of those people.
Interesting. Yeah, no, good point.
But yeah, that's where we're at with that. Tonight, again, want to give the preface, we're not particularly sticking with the Jordan Peterson story. We want to talk about suing the government. And we have our second guest for the evening tonight in studio with us, Jeffrey Rath. Thank you so much for joining tonight.
Oh, it's a pleasure as always. How are you?
Great. Oh, we'll do that. Make it easy for everyone to be seen. So, Jeff, you are suing the government. You're suing the provincial and the federal government. And
we actually have two major class action lawsuits going right now. We have one that's against the province of Alberta alone, right, on behalf of all of the business owners and the businesses in Alberta that were illegally shut down during the COVID pandemic. And when I say illegally shut down, Alberta is the only jurisdiction in the country where lawyers, specifically our office, have succeeded in getting a court order declaring every single pandemic order issued by the Chief Medical Officer of Health to be illegal. So what we're doing in that one is we're suing the government of Alberta on behalf of all of the businesses that were illegally shut down by Jason Kenney and his cabinet, hiding behind Dina Hinshaw's bad bangs and skirts, pretending that the orders that were being issued by Dina Hinshaw were medical orders as opposed to political decisions that were made by cabinet that should have been issued under the Emergencies Act. But of course, Kenney and his Sky Palace cocktail cabinet had no interest in taking political responsibility for these orders by issuing them under the Emergencies Act and having to explain to their constituents why the businesses of healthy people were being closed and why healthy customers of these healthy business owners couldn't attend their businesses, where, you know, the big Chinese-owned box stores and everything else could remain open on the theory that as long as you were going to, you know, a store that was, you know, that was owned by, you know, largely by China or people that have interests in China, you wouldn't catch a Chinese cold bug. But if you went into an Alberta-owned business that was owned by, you know, small business owners in Alberta, that somehow or other you are more likely to contract the Chinese cold bug and pass the Chinese cold bug on to other people. So, of course, all of that's been deemed to be illegal now. And we're suing literally on behalf of every single person that was shut down during the pandemic by these orders that lost money, on the theory that it was misfeasance. One of the causes of action that we've pled is misfeasance in public office by Jason Kenney and his cabinet, illegally issuing these orders fraudulently through Dina Hinshaw, you know, when they should have been issued under the public or under the Emergencies Act.
Hey, Jeff, a quick question. So, you know, you said at the beginning that you're like Alberta, you guys specifically are the first ones to do this. Do you not somehow set a precedent and then sort of empower other lawyers in other provinces to do the same thing? Like,
yeah,
I just don't know.
I honestly just don't know what the hell all the other lawyers in the country are doing, right? Honestly, you know, I mean,
yeah.
You know, we obviously, like, we've been on this file from, you know, like, we started fighting all the pandemic restrictions, you know, in 2020. And, you know, like, from the outset, it was clear to me that what they were doing was unlawful on any number of grounds. You know,
yeah,
so
that's crazy because
you know,
you'd think that, you know, the circumstances were similar. Maybe not the minutia, like you said, of it all depends on every province's sort of health act and how they went about doing it. But fundamentally, you'd think that another province, some affected business in another province would want to do the same thing.
Yeah, but what happened, I think, in other provinces, and I haven't researched it on a province by province basis, is that the other cabinets across the country weren't as foolish as Jason Kenney and his cabinet. You know, the word that we've got internally from the government is Kenney and his cabinet knew that what they were doing was illegal, but they were convinced that by the time anybody found out about it, it would all be over and there'd be water under the bridge and nobody would care. They simply thought they weren't going to get caught. Right. So, you know, when we twigged to what was going on and when we busted it for them in court, you know, I think that, we managed to counter ambush them, you know, effectively a lot sooner than they thought anybody was going to succeed in doing it. And as a result, we have this wonderful legal precedent called the Ingram decision, where we literally have a declaration from the court that all of the COVID orders that were issued, shutting down all these businesses in Alberta, were ultra vires, the Public Health Act, or outside of the scope of the Public Health Act, which has now opened the door for us to sue Alberta on behalf of all of the businesses that were unlawfully shut down.
So why is it that they're not crying mootness, just like
because it's not moot, right? Because these businesses suffered real damages, they suffered real losses, right? And suffered real economic and economic harm. And of course, you know, the government knew, and that's the whole thing. The government lawyers were in court arguing, "Oh, there's no cause of action because this wasn't reasonably foreseeable," you know, to get into the language of negligence law, right? And the judge literally looked at them, like, and this is like recently in our certification hearing, looked at the government lawyers like they had three heads and said, I beg your pardon? Like, how could you not know people were going to be economically harmed by these orders? In fact, a good chunk of the government was geared towards coming up with programs to mitigate the harm that they knew they were going to be causing. Right. So don't stand up in my courtroom and tell me that Jason Kenney and his cronies, and this is not his language, of course, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm putting these intemperate words into our learned justice's mouth, but it's like, don't stand up here and tell me that Kenney and his cronies didn't know all of the damage they were inflicting on Alberta, right?
Yeah.
I
like the colorful language, so I want to.
The other thing that was really funny about it was that they actually tried to argue, like in Alberta, we have, and I'm not sure what the situation is in BC or other provinces, but in Alberta, we have this kind of phony HMO that's set up under statute in Alberta. We have this entity called AHS, or Alberta Health Services, which is kind of this dummy corporation that the government always tries to pretend is arm's length from the government. But the statute that sets up AHS basically says that anytime the Minister of Health feels like it, he can fire the board of AHS, he can take over running AHS, he can do whatever he wants with AHS. So Alberta came in and they were trying, there's no cause of action because, the government didn't do all these harmful things. It was AHS. They should have sued AHS. And of course, that ignores the fact that it was Kenney and the cabinet that issued the illegal orders. But what they were saying is when guys like Chris Scott were being hauled away in handcuffs for, having protest openings of their business, and when business owners were being fined hundreds of thousands of dollars for operating contrary to the orders and all the rest of it, the Alberta government was claiming, it was the RCMP and AHS that was enforcing these orders. So any real harm that was caused by the orders that the Alberta government illegally issued was being caused by our agents that were then enforcing the orders. So there's no cause of action because you didn't sue our agents, right? And the judge literally, and this is a direct quote from him, and I'll use it because the language was very strong. He said to the Alberta government lawyers, he says, "You've read previous decisions of mine on this, right?" He said, "I recently ruled in a case 2 years ago that, that on no fewer than 2 occasions in the last number of years, that the government of Alberta unilaterally fired the entire board of AHS and operated all of AHS out of the Minister of Health's office." So he said, "Just hear from me that," and these are his exact words, "it lies ill in the mouth of government of Alberta lawyers to stand up in my courtroom and tell me that AHS is separate and apart from the government of Alberta."
Wow.
Right? So, this is the kind of nonsense that we're dealing with. And I understand sort of the feeling, or the theme of tonight is sort of like, in terms of this discussion, is sort of David versus Goliath. It's like our little law office against the might of the Alberta government. But we deal with it on an ongoing basis. Like the other action we have going is a vaccine injury lawsuit, where, the premise of the case is that, the government of Alberta, the government of Canada, and here for me, this lawsuit would apply, and our pleadings would apply to every other province across the country, because they were all involved. It was actually Bonnie Henry that led the propaganda and fraud committee, of chief medical officers of health, where they would all get together, on the weekly to discuss how they were going to lie to Canadians about the safety and effectiveness of the vaccines, right? And how they were going to control their propaganda spin about how safe and effective the vaccines were and all their various vaccine programs, et cetera. So we're suing both Alberta and Canada for conspiring to commit assault against every citizen in Alberta by deliberately conspiring to keep citizens of Alberta from being fully and properly informed with regard to the vaccines and potential vaccine harms, such that every shot that went into every arm constituted an assault and battery, further to rulings of the Supreme Court of Canada in cases like Morgentaler, where, the Supreme, it's trite law, right? Like you go into a hospital, you sign a release saying that a surgeon can cut you. Well, the reason you sign a release to allow a surgeon to cut you, because cutting you is an assault and battery with a deadly weapon, right?
Yeah.
So you have to, and in order to give that release, you have to be fully informed and, without coercion, without, threat, whatever, in order for that consent to be fully informed in the context of of the law of assault and battery.
So Jeff, just for me, can you expand on this a little bit? Like, I'm unvaccinated. I think the last time I've ever been vaccinated for anything was probably my parents who gave me something. But are you saying that if I wanted to go get, like, I don't know, a flu shot right now, would I have to provide a written consent to get the flu shot?
Well, you'd certainly have to be informed as to any possible, any possible side effects, et cetera, from the shot. And I think good practice would be that doctors should have people have you sign a form saying that you've read what all of the possible, what all of the possible side effects are of the shot, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, it's even worse in the context of the so-called COVID vaccines. I just called them injections because we all know that they weren't vaccines, and we're now getting good jurisprudence out of the United States, effectively, leaving open the question of whether these really are vaccines, given that they don't stop people from contracting the disease, they don't stop people from spreading the disease, et cetera, et cetera. And to the extent
I think it's even Brett Weinstein that calls it a therapeutic. They don't even refer to it.
Yeah, that's the whole point, right? So again, on what theory should you be mandating people to take a therapeutic that requires an artificial substance, specifically artificial mRNA, to be injected into somebody's body against their will? Right.
Well, I mean, I'm an engineer. I looked at it way more pragmatically than that. I just thought, COVID showed up, 2019, let's say October, and then less than a year later, there's a drug. If I had to take that drug, I wouldn't have taken it because you couldn't tell me what the side effects of this thing are going to be or the long-term effects.
And just to be clear, I was, my background, I have an honors degree in political science and an honors degree in law. And, so I'm, I've studied, political science, and I've had I've spent a lot of time observing Justin Trudeau in office, and I've reached, the unshakable conclusion that Justin Trudeau is a complete moron. So if a moron is telling me that I have to take something or be punished, I would generally resist, doing what the moron tells me to do. Because really, it's not, we were, brought up in my family not to listen to morons, right? So
absolutely.
That was kind of all the information that I needed, was that, Justin Trudeau was telling me that I had to do it, that told me that this wasn't safe for me or safe for my family. Right?
Yeah. So you said two cases, but the first one, the Ingram case, is done. But is there a follow up to the original Ingram case, or the one with Kerry allows you sort of piggybacks on Ingram?
Well, no, but that's the whole point, is that the business class action. The reason that we did the original Ingram case the way that we did, and specifically pled and argued for ultra vires in that case, was so that we could bring this business class action. Right. So, and the reason that the ultra vires ruling was so important is because if you get a ruling of ultra vires as opposed to unconstitutionality, right, under the charter, right? If you get a charter ruling, that means that, after the fact of the charter ruling, the law has been declared to be illegal because the courts found it, to be or to be unconstitutional. So in that case, the law is voidable, or it can be voided on pronouncement of what the law really is by the court. But where you get a finding of ultra vires, right, that means the law are outside the scope of the statute. They had no statutory authority to make the decision. That meant that the law was void, what's called void ab initio. So the law was dead on arrival. So the minute they pronounced the law, it was illegal, right? So that's why in Alberta, all of these cases, everybody that had been fined, everybody that had been charged, all the rest of it, all those cases had to be thrown out, was because we succeeded in getting that finding of ultra vires. So when we won Ingram, effectively my office won every other case that was pending before the courts with regard to the lockdown orders on behalf of anybody that was then charged with violating the orders, because the ultra vires finding meant there was no law under which they could have been charged in the first place, because it was dead on arrival.
So in that instance, Jeff, did the Crown sort of dropped the cases voluntarily because they kind of put their head.
Well, it wasn't. It wasn't voluntarily. They had to drop them because they had no law under which they could proceed. The law, all the orders, because they're all charged with. You are being charged with a violation of, CMOH order XYZ, and when XYZ order was determined to be ultra vires, the Public Health Act, they had no basis to pursue the charges. And in Alberta, they not only had to drop all the charges, but they also had to refund all the fines that were levied.
I used the word voluntary as opposed to say automatic. I understood that they didn't want to do it, but it wasn't automatic. They chose to drop them, realizing they weren't going to win. So that's great. Any idea what that would have, what that alone saved in terms of money? Like, how much fines were people facing?
Chris Scott was facing, literally, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties, right? And, but I mean, it's more the fact that all of the people that stood up and said, this is wrong, this can't be legal, right? All of those people were right. It wasn't legal. Right, what they were doing, it was basically Kenny and his little group of cocktail cabinet people, getting together and making up rules as they went along. They were looking at what direction they were getting from the WHO and Theresa Tam and all these other people telling them what to do, and they didn't have the courage or the foresight to stand up and said, "Wait a minute, this is Alberta," right? And in Alberta, we don't quarantine healthy people. We don't shut down businesses of healthy people. We don't tell, healthy Albertans, where they can go or can't go, or make stupid decisions like, at one point, and they had to, they immediately filed new orders to back it up because I was making so much fun of them early on. They literally shut down our high schools, but left the strip clubs, the bars, and the casinos open. Yeah. So I said, isn't that great? I got, we have 18-year-old kids that now can't go to school, but you're going to let them go to the bars and the strip clubs and the casinos because they're 18 and they can do it. Isn't that wonderful? Welcome to Alberta under Jason Kenney. Right. And then, of course, and I was making fun of them about this in the context of an injunction application we were bringing. And literally the day before we went into court, they then passed a new order shutting down the bars, the casinos, and the strip clubs. Right.
Yeah. But it's the same here in British Columbia. They were shutting down like biking trails and walking trails. And meanwhile, the liquor store was open. You couldn't get. It was ridiculous.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, because again, it's BC, and keep in mind, Bonnie Henry was the Saint Bonnie of Henry, as I would refer to her. If you listen to her propaganda machine, right? Was the chairman of this this committee of chief medical officers of health. And don't forget, like Saint Bonnie of Henry is the medical genius that doesn't ever want to use the word addiction in the context of any discussion of drug addicts. And she just refers to them as people with needs that need to have their needs serviced. So of course it's perfectly fine for former, medical officers of health and buddies of hers to get legal heroin distribution licenses and effectively become legal smack dealers in British Columbia, legally selling opiates to addicts because they have needs that need to be serviced. I mean, this is the level of idiocy that we're dealing with.
Yeah, well, it's crazy. In British Columbia, we're suffering through that. And we're going through an election right now, so there is a chance that we could get rid of Bonnie Heimler. But so I wanted to ask though, is this your case? Is that isolated to Alberta? Is there hope for the rest of Canada that we could have lawyers step up to the plate and have the guts like you and actually be successful in suing their governments?
I would certainly hope so. I mean, like we're trying to, and this is kind of what my office has always done, is that we always sort of try to lead the way on this stuff. And I mean, I've always, and believe me, if you watch the cases that I've argued over my career, I'm always on the front edge of this stuff. And like I was arguing, First Nations consultation cases before anybody really thought to do it through judicial reviews and otherwise, right? So, I've always been on the front edge of this stuff, and it's kind of, if I'm not on the cutting edge and doing stuff that hasn't been done before, that isn't unique or whatever, I'm kind of like, well, that's kind of boring law. Like, why would I just keep doing the same shit over and over again that other people could do, right? So
yeah, but to Clyde's question, I assisted. I was in court with you guys there 2 days ago. You're suing Alberta and you're suing Canada. So somehow or other, you are. I mean, if you win and Canada is guilty of having intentionally harmed people, you've opened a huge opportunity for people across the country. Like,
oh, sure.
Like
I mean, sure. Yeah. And this will set a huge, we're hoping this will set a huge precedent going forward, for the entire country. And certainly the vaccine harms case, has national application and doesn't have to deal with that, the unique set of facts where Jason Kenney and his little group of cocktail drinkers knew they were acting illegally and were effectively pretending that whatever they were doing were doctor's orders, which is a very unique circumstance in the context of our business class action, right?
Yeah.
But certainly all the law that we're pleading, and it's really interesting, we were doing some research today and we're actually amending our pleadings to bring in the Competition Act and the Food and we'd already pled stuff in and around the Food and Drug Act, but the Competition Act itself makes it illegal for people to promote the supply of a product using fraudulent methods and methodology, right?
Oh, really?
And yeah, absolutely. And so that that also is going to have national application, because under the Competition Act, it specifically allows you to sue governments if governments are also engaged in that kind of conduct. So think about what was going on. Let's start first of all with the completely bogus statement that the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine were respectively 90 and 93% effective, right? Well, that was on the basis of relative risk reduction as opposed to absolute risk reduction. And relative risk reduction is just a bullshit shell game, right? It makes it seem like if you get the shot, you've got a 90% chance of not getting the disease. That's not what that means at all. If you wanted that number, they needed to tell you what absolute risk reduction is. And the absolute risk reduction on both of those shots was less than 5%. Right, is my recollection of the numbers. They didn't even have that information
at the time, did they?
No. But on top of
used in studies.
Right, but on top of it, though, the people in the know that were part of Bonnie Henry's or Bonnie Goebel's committee, the propaganda committee. These are people that supposedly have all kinds of medical degrees, are well educated, they have PhDs, they have all these credentials. They know the difference between relative risk reduction and absolute risk reduction, and they know that that 90% number doesn't mean that you've got if you take this shot, you've got a 90% chance of not, of getting the disease because it's, you're 90% protected. They knew that that was misleading, but they were intentionally using those numbers, knowing full well that people, that the vaccine contracts themselves said that these vaccines were not warranted to stop people from getting the disease, were not warranted to stop people from spreading the disease, were not warranted for safety. I mean, those things were written right into the vaccine contracts. So these people knew this, right? But yet they're still standing up in public and going safe and effective, and all the other slogans. It's like the first vaccine is the best vaccine. That was one of my favorites, by the way. It's like, you're getting back to your point as an engineer. It's like the first vaccine is the best vaccine. It's like, it's like the first rocket ship is the best rocket ship.
Oh, yeah,
right? From an engineer,
I'm a mechanic. We always say don't buy the first model of any car. Like, come out with a new car.
Right?
You buy like the second, third model, if anything.
Now,
well,
Jeff,
right, but just let me finish this point on the vaccines, because I'm kind of on a roll on that. But the other thing that you need to keep in mind with that is the vaccines aren't warranted for safety and efficacy, but also the vaccine monographs themselves said we haven't tested these and they're not safe to be mixed and matched with other products. They're not interchangeable with other vaccines. But the government was standing up, and that's how our client Carrie Sakamoto was so horribly injured. Dina Hinshaw stood up and told everybody to step up to the magical Dina Hinshaw vaccine buffet. And if you had AstraZeneca, don't worry about it. Get whatever other shot you can get, because that's what she did, and that's the best way to go. And of course, the vaccine manufacturers themselves said that that was contraindicated. And then on top of that, I mean, benighted public health officials to this day are still telling people they can get their frickin' COVID boosters simultaneous to their flu shots. And the monographs, again, themselves advise against, from a safety perspective, of mixing and matching the COVID, the mRNA shots with other with other vaccines. And they're doing it, even though they know it's unsafe, or they should know it's unsafe. And if they don't know it's unsafe, it's because they're grossly incompetent.
That's crazy. No. What I wanted to get you to expand on a little bit, you mentioned sort of the Consumer Act and advertising, and I was going to ask, like, are you referring to things like, for instance, here in Alberta, like we had a lottery, we had an insane lottery, like, remember we had a lottery, and if you got the vaccine, you got your name in for $1 million prize. The government gave out like preloaded Visa cards with $100. I know there's places where they gave like, they had parties where you got donuts and ice cream and stuff like that. Like, are you also trying to link that? Is that what you meant by the Consumer Act?
I mean, we pled all of that stuff generally, but I mean, in Alberta, like, the government of Alberta was like, all the stuff they did was crazy, right? It was like, and as an example, I guess I'd sort of indicated with my comments about Trudeau being a moron and me going the opposite way that he recommended. You can probably guess that I didn't run out and get vaccinated. But here I am, a 6'4" white male for the first time in my life, finding myself being discriminated against on the basis that I can't take my 10-year-old daughter to the same Humpty's restaurant that we've been going to for breakfast every Sunday since she was 3 years old, because we were unvaccinated. And even though, people would come up to me and, hey, Jeff, blah, 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 I've got a, buddy that's a trainer for XYZ sports team, or I know so-and-so that can do this and do that and blah, 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 and we can get you a phony vaccine certificate, blah, blah, blah. I go, listen, no, I'm a member of the Law Society of Alberta. And if anybody ever found out that I was navigating my way through the world on forged documents, that I'd lose my law license faster than it would make your head spin. So, thanks, but no thanks, but I'll just navigate my way through this, on the basis that I'm, that I am what I am, right? But no, I mean, the level of discrimination and coercion that was applied to people, like us, was beyond belief. Couldn't go to restaurants with my kid, couldn't go to sports games with my kid. I even had to go get, COVID tested to go to the courthouse, right, to appear, in court and have my little COVID, I'm COVID negative paper to walk into the court, when vaccinated people who were just as likely to spread COVID as an unvaccinated person, didn't have to go through the same rigmarole and get the same piece of paper, right? When they were just as likely to, the vaccinated were just as likely to spread COVID or more likely to spread COVID than the unvaccinated. Because of the damage to their immune systems, right?
It was a crazy time. I'm glad you guys are doing what you're doing, because I know for a fact. I mean, I'm very political and I'm involved politically, and politicians want to put this behind. Yeah, I hear that all the time, right? And some members of the public want to put this behind, but we can't put this behind, because if we just forget this and put it behind, it'll get repeated. I
just wanted to jump in on that. By and large, all the people that say, "Oh, we just need to put this behind us," those are all the people that are culpable. You know what I mean? They have guilty consciences because they were either uber Karens that were ruining everybody's lives by sticking their nose into other people's business, or alternatively, were members of the administrative state or the government or whatever who were complicit in these massive human rights violations that had no basis in science or fact. So, of course, they want to put it behind
because they were so eager to do what they did that we need to actually be steadfast in going after them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. So let's get on to the David and Goliath. We wanted to. I mean, the reason we wanted you on the show is, I went in court with you there. I sat behind you guys on what day was that? Tuesday or Wednesday, and I told I came on the show with Clyde, and I told people after that brief experience that you hear about these trials all the time, but when you actually sit down and you see, for me, it was intimidating. Like when you and the judge and others are referring to like the other side as Canada and Alberta, I'm like, oh my Lord, like you're fighting. We joked about this, but it's no joke. You're fighting the king. You're
Yeah.
fighting
that's
the
right.
king.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean,
And-
I've made an entire career out of going, but he's not wearing any clothes, right? Honestly, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So,
You
so
know,
for me,
yeah.
it's intimidating, but for you, it's another day. It's a day in court.
Yeah, I've been suing governments for 32 years, right? I've been practicing, well, maybe 33 years now. I was admitted to the bar on July 12th of 1991. So I guess this is going to be my 33rd year practicing law. And my practice has by and large been involved in suing various levels of government for various constitutional violations. So that's been my entire career, my entire practice.
And then I take it you've won quite a few of these, so it's not futile.
Yeah.
It's
No.
I
I wouldn't in good conscience recommend clients take cases forward if we were going to lose. I mean, I think we're probably batting somewhere around 700. We have a pretty good track record. If you look at the cases that we've argued over the years, we've certainly won far more constitutional precedents than we've lost.
Good.
It just seems so incredibly daunting when you look at the state and the fact that they can just tax you. They're taxing you, me, Marty, everybody in the audience here to fight against you in this.
Well, what's really problematic, and I mean, keep in mind, my background is in administrative and constitutional law. I'm one guy, one law firm, right? That does what I'm doing. And there's, in fairness, there's probably a couple dozen firms, similar to mine across the country, or lawyers that do what I do, right? But there's a couple dozen of us, right? And there's literally thousands of them. If you think about, the AG's department in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, whatever, Department of Justice Canada, right? So you literally have, this army of, several thousand, and I'll bet you it's 5,000 or 6,000, right? If you had to think about it, right? Government lawyers from coast to coast to coast to coast, whose literally their full-time job is to push the government's version of the law forward through the courts and establishing the precedential base under which we have to litigate, right? So,
even in this case, Jeff, on Tuesday there, like you guys, there was three of you, right? There was you, Eva, and I can't remember the other gentleman's name. And then
Mark Freeman, our senior counsel, Mark Freeman. Yeah.
Mark. And on the other side, there was one lady present, two officially on conference call. But how many people on the other side do you think are truly there battling you?
Well, no, there were three lawyers for Canada, one in the courtroom and two on Zoom, and then Alberta had three on Zoom, right?
Okay.
So they've got six lawyers to R3, right? And then they have a really deep bench, and then they have hundreds of other lawyers in their office to do their bidding, and fill in behind them, on these cases, right? Mm-hmm. So it's certainly an uphill battle, but thankfully, we've been doing this long enough that by and large, there is a strong jurisprudential basis for what we're doing. Like in the business class action case, I mean, we've got Supreme Court cases going back to the 1950s, like Ron Corelli and Duplessis, and then recently the Power decision at the Supreme Court, where the courts recognize that where governments, act outside of the scope of their authority, that you can sue them for basically malfeasance in public office, breach of public duty, etc. I mean, this is getting a bit technical. There's a case called Saskatchewan Wheat Pool. You can't sue them simply for breach of statutory duty anymore. It has to get subsumed either into the law of negligence or a tort called misfeasance in public office. But those are certainly open to us, right?
Yeah.
And then in the vaccine case, we can literally sue under the Food and Drug Act. We can sue under the Competition Act. We can sue in negligence. We can sue. We can sue in conspiracy to commit assault and battery. I mean, there's various causes of action that apply. And again, these are all fairly these are very unique circumstances. So your listeners should understand the government's latest thing now. If you can imagine this. Given what everybody that got vaccinated went through, like people, if you want to travel to see your sick grandma, you have to get vaccinated. You want to get on a plane, you have to get vaccinated. If you have a home in the Gulf Islands or want to go back and forth between Vancouver and Victoria and get on a ferry, you have to be vaccinated, right? All of that bullshit where people's, civil liberties and mobility rights and ability to travel were being restricted simply on the whim of dictator Trudeau, right? All of those people, were harmed by this, but the government lawyers are standing up in our case saying, oh, well, there's no cause of action. We had no duty of care. So Canada had no duty of care. Alberta had no duty of care to make sure that people weren't being harmed by these vaccine edicts or being harmed by these vaccines.
Then
right?
why was it up to them to protect us from the pandemic in the first place?
Well, that's that's the other question, right?
I
if
think
they have no duty of care, well, then they should not care about.
That was I think when you used the word moot earlier in the conversation, Clyde, that's what you were referring to, right? Didn't the Supreme Court refused to hear? Was it Brian Peckford and somebody else who?
No, but that's a different circumstance, right? So
okay,
and I'm very familiar
with
with Brian's case, and Brian actually became something of a very a very treasured mentor of mine through the pandemic, and we'd correspond back and forth. For me, it's like, as I still consider myself a young lawyer compared to Brian Peckford. To have somebody of Brian's stature, corresponding with you and giving you legal advice on the QT was, a real honor and a real pleasure for me, right? Wow. But anyway, what happened with Brian's case was that they were challenging the lockdown orders themselves, right? So then what happened was, once the lockdown orders were no longer in place, they'd been rescinded. That's where the mootness comes in. Well, why are you seeking to have an order that no longer exists, declared ultra vires or declared illegal or whatever it is, right? And, in our case, what we were arguing is, no, this isn't moot because people were harmed by this, or, we're seeking damages for people that have been injured by the vaccines, right? So it's, it's not moot.
Right. So it's like saying,
so it's kind of like saying, if you put it, go ahead. Brian's case was trying to get rid of a rescinded order that had already been rescinded. They weren't if they were seeking damages, if they sued for damages, it wouldn't have been moot. But they were seeking a declaration to set aside the order. They were proceeding administratively, right?
And the damages would have probably been hard to prove in his case, right? Like me saying, well, I couldn't fly to see my mother. How do you quantify that? I'm sure there's a damage there, but it's a little harder than somebody who's been injured by a vaccine.
Right. But somebody like Kerry Sakamoto, who's, basically suffered neurological deficits, who's suffered severe paralysis, whose entire way of life has been destroyed. Clearly that's not moot. She's suffering ongoing damages, right? But even to the extent that the governments are trying to argue this, it's such a ridiculous argument. They tried to argue it in our business class action too. It's like, oh, well, the effect of these orders was just temporary. And it's like, yeah, that's like saying a drunk running a red light and killing somebody. The accident was just temporary. It took place in a matter of seconds, and people were horribly killed and injured and maimed and their lives destroyed. It was just a temporary accident, right? I mean, the damages are long-term and they're ongoing. So it's to my way of thinking, with the greatest of respect to my learned friends, it's just a stupid argument.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, so Brian Peckford's case, from what I understand, was based on, because he said that there was a number of different things that he could have gone after the government for, but especially when it comes to the charter, and he chose mobility rights, and that was the one thing that he wanted to go after. He wanted to, argue the case that they were infringing on the charter rights for mobility in Canada, and again, it was just decided moot because. So is this the kind of thing that the government could go forward in the future to do?
Well,
bring about temporary things, and then as soon as people complain about it, just drop the
well, I think there's a lesson here, right? Like in terms of the whole mootness argument, and the lesson is, administrative law remedies, while they may be the most expeditious way to go, sometimes there's nothing wrong with a good old fashioned lawsuit where you sue for damages. Right. Yeah. Because then that's, hindsight being 20/20, that would have been the answer to the mootness argument. It's like, well, no, it's not moot because we need, I was restricted in my freedom and effectively became, by government, illegal government order, unconstitutional government order, made a prisoner of my home and was not allowed to travel in violation of my rights. And I'm seeking damages for that. So if you're seeking damages, you would have gone away, you would have gotten around the mootness point. Right. Yeah,
you guys have a lot of challenges just deciding, who to go after and under what, circumstances, what rules, right? I mean, like Clyde said, Brian chose a certain approach. in hindsight, he might have chosen a different approach, but you never know. So
yeah,
I wanted to ask,
hindsight's always perfect, right? I mean, like, once the Supreme Court of Canada tells you where to go, you kind of go, geez, I wish I'd argued that in a different way because I would have gotten around what they did to me, right? But again, hindsight's 2020, right?
Weird question for you: is moot a legal term? Like, I've heard the word moot before. Like, believe it or not, English is my second language, but is moot? What does moot mean?
What is your first language? First of all, just out of curiosity.
I'm French.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah. So, but anyway, no, it is a legal term, and it just means that whatever it is that you're arguing about, basically no longer matters because it's been decided, or it's been, that whatever ill you're complaining of no longer exists. So there's no remedy required.
It's a legal term, but it is used in conversation by people, right? Like people say, okay, got it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And in law schools they have moot courts, right, where people argue hypothetical or fictional cases, right? It's the same idea, right? Like you're arguing over something that doesn't.
Did you know Clyde is fluent in Japanese?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, that's my second language. Not my first.
I'm actually. I'll just because you said your first language was French. My family's actually French Canadian. My probably 15th time great grandfather was a carpenter in the employ of the Seigneur de Longueuil, and he arrived in Longueuil in 1648. So my family name is Lamoureux. And when I was a young kid, we would go to mass every Sunday at the parish of Lamoureux, which is a little teeny French community across the river from Fort Saskatchewan in Alberta. And of course, after mass, we'd go out in the farmyard and be swearing away in French. And of course, as you know, all the swear words in French are religious, right?
Yeah.
So this aunt of mine came out one day and said in French, "Si tu faut sacrer, il faut que tu sacres en anglais pour que le bon Dieu peut pas te comprendre," right? Which means in English, for our English viewers,
j'ai parfaitement compris.
Yeah, so which means if you're going to swear in English so the good Lord won't understand you. So I always tell the people, not only was I raised as a French Catholic, but taught from a very early age that God didn't speak English.
Well, if your ancestors got there in 1648, they got there 14 years after mine. So
yeah, there you go, right?
There you go. We've been here a long time. That's awesome. Awesome. Yeah.
Incredible. So, well, I didn't understand a word that you just said, but I'll pass that along with the pardon.
But you did understand the English translation. Right?
I did, yeah. Absolutely. So, with a case like this, you're going after the government. Is this something that takes several years, even decades? What kind of timeline do you see with cases like this? Well,
I mean, the vaccine class action, I think much longer than the business class action, because they're going to dig in on this, and there's going to be a lot of pressure at the federal level, and again, it depends, because a lot of these things are political, right? So, how long do we think Trudeau is going to survive in office is the question, right? So as long as Trudeau's in office, this case is not going to settle, right? Like they're not going to admit that they're wrong. They're going to drag it out for as long as possible, and they're not going to want responsibility to rest where it belongs, right? So, so there's that, right? But with the business class action as an example, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on the government of Alberta, and there should be. Everybody from Alberta that's listening to this podcast, please email Danielle Smith, please email your MLAs and say, why the hell are you instructing your lawyers to fight over not compensating Albertans who suffered as a result of illegal government orders, right? So, right. There's obviously quite a bit of sympathy within the government, within the elected government of Alberta, right? Elected members of the legislature to settle that case, because obviously their constituents think that, that forcing people into bankruptcy in the name of public health, completely incompetent manner is something that the government should have to pay for, right? So I think that case, could settle much sooner than the vaccine class action. But, obviously, these things are political. And if there's a change of government, hopefully, a conservative government in Canada would be a lot more interested in settling this and helping the blame rest on, the former, what would then be the former Liberal government of Canada and Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, I mean, it's just my observation. When I was there this week and I watched, I didn't get the like watching you guys. It was procedural. I get that it was very procedural at this point. It won't get really cool until later. But you know, when you guys were picking the next date to meet, the judge to me seemed to want to keep moving this along, right? I immediately expected her to say, "Oh, you know, we can't meet until March next year," but you know, she seemed to offer some dates that would keep this moving along. Do you get a sense that they're? I guess it's too early to know if they're dragging their feet. They're not dragging their feet at this point.
No, but I mean, from my perspective, you know, they have a playbook, right? And so the playbook is, you know, we want to bring a motion to strike, so you know, so we can delay these proceedings, right? So every time you set down a full day special, like what we're dealing with now is what's called a sequencing motion, right? We're saying that there shouldn't be a motion to strike, or if there is a motion to strike, it should be heard simultaneous to the class action certification, because it's exactly the same issues for striking pleadings as it is to certify a class action in terms of, is there a valid cause of action on the pleadings, right? So, you know, our view is that the government is trying to delay by sticking this motion to strike motion at the front end to try to gobble up a year's worth of litigation time.
Right.
And the reason that the judge properly is dealing with the sequencing issue quickly is to limit the ability of the government to chew up an entire year, you know, prior to getting to the meat of the matter, which is the certification hearing. So I think she's doing an excellent job and doing what she should do. And, you know, we're happy with where we're at right now in terms of case management, certainly.
Good. Now, another question just for me. There wasn't a very big crowd there. Does it bother you if there's a crowd? Do you want a crowd? What's your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, it doesn't bother me. Frankly, it's entirely irrelevant to me, you know, to be honest. I mean, I think when we were litigating the Ingram case, there were thousands of people watching online, you know, as that was going forward, right? So, you know, it's like anything else when you're in the zone and you're arguing these things. You just, you know, you're just so in the zone in terms of what you're doing that you don't pay any attention to it.
Yeah, no,
and I don't think it influences. If your question is, does it influence the court in any way? It doesn't influence the court in any way whatsoever. That, you know,
okay, that's what I meant.
The judge is, you know, the judge is going to make what the judge believes to be the correct judicial decision, regardless of how many people are paying attention.
No, that's what I meant, because you know, between you and me, if you want more people there, I can get you more people, right? Like, if
you know, I mean, if people are interested, I mean, we have an open court system, and certainly the more people that learn about our system and learn, you know, and watch what's going on, you know, I think the better. You know, I think the more engaged, you know, people are, you know, in these processes, the better. But I also, you know, want to encourage people to remember that, you know, if you really want to speed up settlement of these issues, it really comes from political pressure, not, you know, as much as it does from legal pressure. And everybody should be writing their MPs and writing their MLAs and saying, what the hell are you guys doing litigating the obvious? What went on through the pandemic was a massive abuse of human rights. And how dare you guys say that what you did in terms of lying to people about the safety and efficacy of these vaccines was in any way defensible?
Well,
right?
But on that point, Claire, you know, there was another important case lately. I mean, we've all been talking about the Coots thing, and then every time Danielle Smith, because you say politician, I'm immediately going to the top when I'm thinking Danielle Smith. Every time the question was asked, like for Joe Public, Coots looked like it was dragging on, and it looked like an abuse of power. And we kept, at every town hall that I went this summer, like 6 or 7 of them, that question came up from Danielle. Could you please, you know, maybe not interfere, but inquire, make this move faster? And her answer was always very black and white. I cannot interfere. So who are you saying we should talk to? Like,
well, no, but there's a big difference, first of all, between a criminal case and a criminal prosecution and civil litigation, right?
Okay.
You know, like, as far as settling civil litigation goes, it's certainly, you know, at the end of the day, the client is the government of Alberta. Danielle is the elected leader of the government of Alberta, right? So the instructions have to come from somewhere to settle a multi-billion-dollar case, and those instructions will come from cabinet, right?
Gotcha.
So that they're the final decision maker, right? So those are the people that need to be pressured, and they need to be told, if you don't do it, we're not going to vote for you.
So
You know,
Coots was
you know,
something very different. Coots was a criminal matter.
Yeah, and then don't forget too, we had that weird circumstance with, and I can't even remember his name now because he's so irrelevant to me. But you know, that lunatic separatist leader that recorded his telephone conversation with Danielle and then leaked it to the press. Whatever, right? Can't remember his name right now.
Pulowski.
Yeah,
Pulowski.
Pulowski. There we go. Yeah, Pulowski. So, you know, and then, you know, that was enough of an embarrassment to Danielle. And you had Madam Justice Tressler, you know, the ethics commissioner, you know, weighing in and saying it was entirely inappropriate for Danielle to have had that conversation with them and blah, 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 you know, all that stuff, right? So, you know, Danielle, you know, I think has been oversold on the idea that she should have no input whatsoever into any legal matters. And as a matter of fact, that's entirely wrong because, I mean, these decisions, you know, like to settle, you know, big civil actions should not be left to the bureaucrats, right? I mean, unelected deputy ministers should not be making these decisions. These are major policy decisions that have, you know, that need to be made at a very high level in terms of the allocation of resources to settle these cases. You know, like, you know, I'm sure that, you know, the $10 million settlement that went to that terrorist that murdered those Americans that ended up in Guantanamo Bay, you know, that settlement, you know, number was probably approved at the cabinet level, right? Yeah. You know, so, you know, those decisions aren't made by bureaucrats, right? You know, leaving aside the issue of, you know, how, you know, a known terrorist murderer gets $10 million, but First Nations people who were literally raped and tortured in residential school got hundreds of thousands. I mean, you know, let's puzzle that one out for a minute, you know?
So are you are you saying then that in a case like this one, Kerry's case in particular, that Alberta could settle quickly, could say, you know what, we're not fighting this? Like, yeah.
And you know, and certainly, you know, certainly with the business class action case, you know, that's the case in spades, that the government of Alberta could just say, look, we did wrong. We passed illegal orders. We, you know, intentionally harmed all of these businesses. We knew we were doing it. We shouldn't have done it. And now let's all roll up our sleeves and figure out a way to make all of these people whole again. You know, people that were harmed. And I mean, it is a little bit complicated because, you know, obviously some businesses did, but you know, you have this anomaly where some people did better in the pandemic than others because their competitors were being shut down while they were allowed to operate, or competing restaurants were shut down, and certain other restaurants were better set up or had a better product for takeout. Like if you had a pizza joint, you were doing great. But if you had a dine-in establishment serving prime rib and Yorkshire pudding, you know, this wasn't the type of, you know, these weren't the type of meals that's, you know, traveled very well through Skip the Dishes, right? So, you know, those types of places did really poorly. And if you had a pizza joint, you did really well, right? So, you know, so those things need to be factored in terms of, you know, did you suffer damages or not? Some businesses did, others didn't, right?
Is there overlap between like a civil court reaches a judgment or a settlement? Any of the findings, could those lead to like an actual criminal prosecution of people, you know, say there was negligence that was discovered in that case? Could that turn into a criminal case against some of the people who brought some of these measures on?
I mean, theoretically, but I think the reality of it is it would be very unlikely, right? You know, I mean, I certainly have my own personal views on, you know, whether or not some of these people were criminally culpable, right? You know, let's take the childhood vaccines as an example. I mean, I personally wrote to Justin Trudeau, Dina Hinshaw, Jason Kenney, Theresa Tam, et cetera, prior to the advent of the childhood vaccines, you know, being released, and attached the table 14 from the Pfizer EUA study that showed that, you know, the vaccines were only going to notionally save 1 life per million of a child from COVID, but we're going to put 34 kids per million into hospital with myocarditis into the ICU. It was like 65 or 66 in the hospital, 34 into ICU is what they admitted to, which means that, you know, talking to any expert, you know, you're probably looking at anywhere from, you know, Pfizer is admitting with the ICU admissions between 5 and 15 deaths of kids from the vaccine just for myocarditis. And that didn't include anaphylaxis, transverse myelitis, you know, any other number of fatal things that could happen from the shots. So, you know, Trudeau, Tam, Kenney, and Hinshaw were all put on notice prior to releasing the childhood vaccines that the COVID shots were going to kill more children than COVID. right? So, theoretically, to the extent that you could prove that a child died, right, from the COVID shot, when they were warned that this would happen, maybe criminal liability could attach. My personal view is that it should, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That to me was what was so shocking, is that, this whole bill of goods that was sold to parents over the so-called safety and efficacy of the COVID vaccines, and convincing parents that, you got to get the kid, your kids need to get the shot or they're going to kill their grandparents, or if you don't want your children to die, you need to give them the COVID shot. I mean, that's what happened in Alberta, right? Both before the advent of the 14 to 18-year-old vaccine and then the infant vaccine. Dina Hinshaw, fraudulently went out onto television, to tell people about some mysterious case that she just saved up, to talk about, where, some child had died from COVID. And then when you dug into both of them, I mean, one kid had stage 4 cancer, and then the other one was suffering from horrible birth defects and died from a bunch of other comorbidities that had nothing to do with COVID, right? So
yeah, she retracted those, I think, right?
But the damage was done, right? I mean, the whole point was, let's terrify parents into getting their kids this shot that they knew or should have known from reading the Pfizer data. I'm a lawyer. I mean, if I can read this and come to the conclusion that you're going to kill more kids with COVID with the shot than are going to die from COVID, why the hell aren't all these people with these massive public health credentials able to come to the same conclusion from data that's there in black and white in front of them? I mean, to me, that was criminal, and to the fact that they still do it, right? And I mean, one of the other ones, and just pay attention to this, Pfizer's own data and their own material admits that if you get the COVID shot, get this, you're 4 times more likely to contract RSV, which is another very, potentially dangerous respiratory illness, right? And interestingly, kids that get RSV, right, especially younger children that get RSV, are far more likely to die from RSV than they are to die from COVID, right? So do you think any parent that was told, well, first of all, just on the early data, if your kid gets the COVID shot, they're more likely to die from the shot than COVID. Oh, and a known side effect of the shot is that your child will become 4 times more likely to contract a disease that's 600% more likely to kill them than COVID. What parent in their right mind would give their kid that shot? Right? And all of that was hid from the public, and none of it was, was mentioned by any of these so-called public health doctors. And Dina Hinshaw would literally stand up in Alberta and, I am your doctor and you are all of my patients, right? And this, just absolutely nauseating presentation where she pretended that she was there for the public good, when, clearly, from the allegations that we made in various pleadings, she was negligent. And I mean, you want proof of negligence. She didn't even know what her frickin' authority was under the Public Health Act. She didn't know that she was the one that had to be to make the decisions. She thought it was okay to have Kenny and company make the decisions and then pretend that she was the decision maker.
Actually, you're making me think of a question here. Down the road with either of these cases that you're arguing right now, will you be bringing witnesses, or is all your pleading just based on sort of?
Oh no! I mean, obviously, if we go to trial, we'll be bringing witnesses. I mean, quite often civil cases settle before trial, right?
Yeah,
like 95% of civil cases settle before trial.
Yeah, so, I'm listening to you talk. I'd love for you to. Is there any scenario where you might bring a Dr. Hinshaw on the stand?
Well, I actually, if you want to find something really interesting and it's floating around, I cross-examined Dr. Hinshaw in the Ingram case, right? And it was really interesting. Like and I was going at her, pretty hard because I wanted to attack her credibility because I don't find her to be that credible. And one of the questions that I asked her specifically was whether or not she could explain the difference between absolute risk or relative risk reduction and absolute risk reduction for the court, right? And the minute I asked the question, the judge herself in that case interrupted and said, I'm not allowing that question. That's completely irrelevant to this case.
Oh, wow.
You know, and had, you know, first of all, it would have been relevant had Dina Hinshaw not been able to explain the difference, right? That in and of itself would have been instructive. But had Dina Hinshaw answered that question truthfully and honestly, right, I think it would have put the judge in a real box in terms of, you know, her credibility. Because when you're standing up and telling the public at large that something's 90% effective, you know, we all think that that means one thing, but really from a scientific and vaccinology basis, it means something totally different if it's relative risk reduction as opposed to absolute risk reduction.
Yeah.
And and that truth never came out in the Ingram case because the judge prevented it from happening.
Wow. Yeah. Well, Clyde, I got questions. I could keep going on all day long. But like,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I
really enjoy talking to you guys. I'm happy to come back anytime you want to have.
Yeah,
Oh,
I want to
good
ask this
deal,
one
good
question though. This one's been on my mind too. Do you think? I'm sure Pfizer, like you mentioned, Pfizer is the most obvious one. But like, is Pfizer paying attention to this? Do you think?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they are.
Yeah.
Right.
And would they ever? Do you think?
But that being said, I mean, Pfizer. You know, you have to give Pfizer some credit. Like when, you know, just to look at the portions of the vaccine contract that we've seen to date. I mean, Pfizer was being honest. It's like, we're not warranting these things for safety. Like, you know, these things were rushed to market. They weren't adequately studied. We have no responsibility whatsoever. If you guys put these things out to the public, it's all on you. And on top of it, we want an indemnity so that if we get sued, you have to step in and defend us and pay our legal bills and pay any damages that accrue to us, because we're not telling you for a second that these products are safe for human consumption. So that was Pfizer's contract, right? So
yeah, you're not going after Pfizer. You're definitely not going after Pfizer.
No, because I mean, Pfizer would just third party Canada, and you just get into the stupid circle jerk between, you know, Canada and Pfizer, and you know, you might just as well go after the people that I think are guilty, which are all the benighted members of FAC, the Public Health Agency of Canada, that stuck these things into people's arms, knowing or should have, you know, or should have known that these products weren't unsafe. They knew they weren't safe.
Yeah.
Let's be clear here. They knew these products weren't safe.
Well, they knew, but then the proof of that would be. Have you asked for the contracts? Is that something you're hoping to get?
We'll get there through discovery. We were going to bring a motion early on. You know, and you saw we had that discussion with the judge about it. She was, you know, we were going to bring that motion, and then, you know, on reflection, we decided to save it for later. You know, because, you know, we don't need to get bogged down in fighting with Pfizer over the contract. We looked at the contract that we did get our hands on, the redacted version that's floating around in public, and there's enough there to show that, you know, that we're on the right track. You know, I'm sure we'll get the rest of it later, and we can have that fight down the line. Right. But we didn't need to have it now. And we didn't need to delay, you know, our certification motion for 6 or 7 months fighting with Pfizer and fighting with the government and all the rest of it. Right.
So I have one question about your other lawsuit, the class action against the Alberta government for the restrictions. Businesses are eligible to join the class action lawsuit. Would subcontractors be eligible under this? Because there was a lot of people who worked in construction, and they weren't the actual contractor, but they were told they couldn't go to the job site as subcontractors in that case.
I would think that the definition is sufficiently broad to apply to any business that was, you know, that was prevented from, you know, making a living through the pandemic. But the way it works too is people don't actually have to sign up for the, you know, to be a member of the class. The presumption in law in Alberta is that unless you opt out, like once the case is certified, you're deemed to be a member of the class, right? So, you know, so that's the basis that we're moving forward on. And then, you know, and then there's a process for advertising and letting people know, and if they want to opt out, how to opt out, and so on, right? So, you know, so we're moving forward on the basis that we're currently representing every business that lost money in Alberta as a result of the illegal COVID lockdown orders, right?
Right.
Why would somebody opt out? Is there a reason?
Oh, I think some people get it in their head that, you know, they could do better suing on their own for individual damages rather than going through, you know, as being a member of the class. But the reality of it is that most individuals can't afford to do it anyway because of the, just the nature of the litigation process and the years of litigation involved and all the rest of it, right? So.
Yeah, these things are interesting. I mean, I remember getting a letter one time. It was from like I don't know, Shaw or somebody like that, and I got I got a check for like $6.54. And like
well,
what the hell? It's because Shaw lost some sort of suit or something, and I was whatever. Anyways.
Yeah, no, but again, this is obviously different than that. I mean, this is, from our perspective, this is a multi-billion-dollar settlement. I mean, the other thing that's really interesting that came out in the government's evidence in the business class action is that, and again, it's like the bureaucrats in the deep state do such a good job taking care of themselves and all of their bureaucratic cronies, right? So the bureaucrats in Alberta, like literally, I'm trying to find some polite language for it. The word I was thinking of started with the word gang, and then it went somewhere from there. But basically looted, I'll just say looted the Alberta government treasury, right? And to the tune of $13 billion for all these special COVID programs and money for the COVID bureaucracy and work at home programs and protecting municipal governments and all this crap, right? Continuation of government bullshit. $13 billion went to the bureaucrats, and less than 700 million went to support Alberta businesses that were being shut down, right?
Yeah.
So the bureaucrats were really good at taking care of themselves, not so good at taking care of everybody else. And from cross-examining, I'll just finish this point. From cross-examining those people, during the pandemic, and we did cross-examine some of the people from the finance department, and they filed affidavits. The general attitude, on the public record from the finance department of Alberta was, they kind of looked at COVID lockdown orders as some sort of messed up stress test that they were applying to Alberta businesses. And it was, oh, well, if you can't survive the lockdown and what were the pittance that we're prepared to provide you, you weren't much of a business anyway. It was that kind of attitude from a bunch of, and again, I'm going to be careful here with my language, but because I'm very, obviously, still very annoyed about these people and their attitude. But, this was the general attitude that was exhibited by these people that literally, have never really worked a day in their life in private industry, never signed the front of a check in their lives, have worked in government all their lives, don't know what it is to actually earn a living in private business. And just this, contemptuous attitude towards small business people. And, oh, well, it's like, if you couldn't survive this, you're not much of a business, right? And, and I know, like some of the clients that we've, that have contacted us with regard to the business class action, I mean, literally, like restaurant chains and, all those types of things. I mean, one group that I'm aware of went into the whole $12 million. I mean, they were debt free at the start of the pandemic. And by the end of it, they were $12 million in the hole from all the credit that they had to take out to keep, staff in place, to keep the restaurants open, to keep leases paid, all the rest of it. And now this business that has this $12 million debt is literally paying, $40,000 a month in interest on an ongoing basis as a result of, all of these illegal government shutdown orders that literally devastated their business.
Well, I talk about this, these kinds of numbers all the time. I mean, just this month I published the government publishes their own numbers of people employment, not unemployment, but employment numbers, right? And like prior to 2019, like there was 2 million Albertans employed. And then during COVID, it suddenly dropped by 400,000 people. Like 400,000 people were affected by mandates, did not work for like up to a year. So I'm doing the math in my head. I'm going, okay, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt of like minimum wage. You're making $35,000 a year, 400,000 people. That's a $12 billion hit. So like it's the numbers are massive. I mean, you talk about a business making 12. I can easily see how COVID mandates cost businesses and individuals upwards of $10 to $20 billion.
One individual, and this is just one individual, right? A physiotherapist, that I was speaking to one day. I said, how much money did you lose during the pandemic? He said, well, it's my clinic. This is blah, 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 25,000 a week times 6 weeks. Oh yeah, I lost 150 grand. Right.
Yeah.
And this is, and this is a business that's really busy. So it's not like, they were out of business or nobody was coming to see them before the lockdowns, right? They were fully booked up to the lockdowns. Then they lost 6 weeks of revenue, and then they were fully booked after the lockdowns. But I mean, it's the type of business where you could only see so many people a day. So even if there was pent up demand from the 6 weeks, or whatever that you were denied revenue, you're not making that money up. That's just money that's gone, right? Yeah. 150 grand, one business, right? Multiply that across all of the businesses in Alberta that were affected. People working out of their houses doing eyelashes or doing, personal grooming or services businesses or whatever. Might not seem a lot to a lot of other people, but the $7,000 or $8,000 a month that those people were making, was important to them. I mean, it kept their mortgages paid, it kept their rent paid, it kept their car payment paid, all those types of things, right?
Wow.
Yeah, rents and car payments didn't take a hiatus when everybody else.
No, that's right.
Unbelievable. But
I can tell people are really paying attention to the discussion. Jeff might not be familiar with the whole mechanics of the show like this, but normally Clyde gets these comments and people will make a super chat. They'll and there's no super chats. Everybody's just listening right now.
There's a lot of people going, that lawyer is a real asshole. You should have
No. Yeah.
No, there have actually been lots of super chats, so maybe I should get to some of those while we get in here. Some of them are from a bit earlier when before Jeff joined into the show. We have Steve's Hyde saying the Russians want us to clear the room. Now, I say no, we don't have to. Quote from Trudeau. That was one that I read before. As well as my first thought was the honeypot. Read that earlier. Eileen Luck did jump in with a super chat afterwards with a comment on it saying Trudeau is being given enough rope to hang himself, but
harangue himself with.
But he's taking King the bait, and haranguing is happening. Awesome. Thank you so much for the super chat. Steve's Hyde also jumping in saying, I have an appointment with the Ottawa hospital for my wrist in a couple of months. Nothing serious, but they asked me my pronouns and I laughed. So they said, well, put them down. We'll put them, put down male then. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Michael Hostetler. I get these. I'm dyslexic, so this really disturbs that. Clyde for Prime Minister, not in my lifetime. No, thank you. I don't want that kind of responsibility. Kenzie Kraken with a $5 super chat says, Kamal Kara, PC MP, is a Canadian politician who is Minister of Diversity, Inclusion, and Persons with Disabilities. She should re-educate Jordan Peterson. Okay, well, we'll sign her up for that one. Hopefully she'll do better than, nobody who's signing up for that task at hand. G Meister with a $10 super chat says, is it possible to get more than $250,000 in bonuses back from Hinshaw? If you win, it's going to be our tax dollars paying, but small businesses need it.
Yeah, well, just to be clear, that point always comes up, and I want to address that. I mean, we're not suing on behalf, of individuals necessarily, and I'm not sure in terms of bonuses. That's kind of outside of the scope, of what we're doing, and I'd have to wrap my mind around that. But people constantly, blah blah blah. It's our tax dollars. It's our tax dollars. Well, what I'm advocating in Alberta is that the government of Alberta takes the position that whatever multi-billion-dollar settlement, ends up being awarded or agreed to, that they simply tell the federal government that henceforth we're going to take that out of any transfer payments going to Quebec or other provinces, because that money is required in Alberta to offset the costs of the pandemic, and should be deducted from whatever we would otherwise pay in transfer payments, and Alberta should declare itself a have-not province for once and look for transfers from other provinces rather than sending money out of the province, right? But, the idea is too, like from an ethical perspective for all of these people, and this, and I'll send this out to all the Karens out there, on what planet should a small segment of society, specifically independent businesses, be told to take one for the team and suffer economic losses for the good of society as a whole, without society as a whole, compensating those people. And that's presuming that everything was done for a bona fide reason, and, that these lockdowns were appropriate and the rest of it. We know they weren't, but even presuming that they were, on what theory should these people not be compensated? right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the taxpayers are on the hook for it, but at least that's spread across the whole of society, as opposed to having this small segment of society, take it in the teeth for everybody else, which is effectively, the current situation.
Yeah, wow, that's an amazing way to put that, in fact. Kenzie Kraken, also with another $10 super chat, says, it was wrong constitutionally to force people to lock down and force vax or any other medical intervention. That should be what was fought against. Otherwise, they will just bring new legislation.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do, Kenzie, and that's the whole point of the vaccine class action that we're bringing. So, effectively, we're trying to get a legal precedent to say that all of these mandates and the rest of it that effectively force people to get vaccinated was effectively a conspiracy to commit assault and battery against the people of Canada. So that's the precedent we're trying to establish.
Well, absolutely. That's amazing. I would like to see that precedent move forward. Mr. Roscoe Pico with a $10 super chat says, my family member said I will be second class citizen, wouldn't let me come out for Christmas for not believing in a fake news. I just recently kind of just started talking to my mom again. This has really affected people getting in the middle of people's families, and it's right at the heart of society. This is crazy.
Well, people in Canada were the victims of a massive psychological warfare operation that was being directed against them by not only, this committee of chief medical officers of health, but by the Canadian Armed Forces itself. I mean, that was a little news item that got skipped over rather quickly in the summer of 2021. And disgustingly and shockingly, and I think it's a scandal, just literally prior to the snap election that Trudeau called in 2021, he directed the Psychological Warfare Command of the Canadian Armed Forces to direct psychological warfare operations against Canadian people to sell them on all the vax messaging, just prior to the election. So, absolutely. And that's public record. So, and nobody's picked up on this. Nobody's really reported on it. I talked
get
to
on
people
it Monday morning. I'm going
to be looking into this one too.
Right. And then, and there's a lot of rumors floating around Ottawa that all the various chiefs of defense staff that were then implicated in so-called sexual harassment allegations dating back to when they were military cadets in university, at drunken college parties, that those people were basically being singled out because, and thrown out of, the office of chief of defense staff because they would not and stood up to the idea that somehow or other the Canadian Armed Forces was going to be used against Canadian population in propaganda campaigns.
Yeah, I did know about
that. One's I mean, so that one's tougher to prove, but it's a matter of public record that Trudeau directed the Psychological Warfare Command to assist the chief medical officers of health in their massive propaganda exercise in and around the vaccines. Because don't forget, this is the other thing that people need to remember. And, and I lived this, right? So we have like a running timeline of all of this crap when it was happening. And, we were in the middle of litigating it all and we were following it all in real time. But they knew as early as January of 2021 that the vaccines were not what they call a sterilizing vaccine, so that they were not 100% effective, nowhere near the 90% relative risk reduction that they were talking about, that in terms of preventing people from getting the disease. So they knew as early as January that anybody that was vaccinated was just as likely as the unvaccinated to pass on COVID, right? So it wasn't going to prevent people from getting the disease or spreading the disease. That became crystal clear in July of 2021 when a massive study was released by the University of California, Davis, where they proved that scientifically that the vaccines would not stop people from getting COVID, would not stop people from spreading COVID, and people that got these so-called vaccines were just as likely to get COVID and spread COVID as anybody who was unvaccinated, right? And the important thing about that is that predated Trudeau's 2021 snap election, predated or was contemporaneous with the involvement of the Psychological Warfare Command of the Canadian Armed Forces against the Canadian people, right? And importantly, was prior to Trudeau bringing in all of the bullshit travel mandates and everything else, forcing people to get vaccinated for no reason whatsoever, or forcing people not to travel for no reason whatsoever, given that if you're unvaccinated or you're vaccinated, you're just as likely to contract the disease or spread the disease as somebody who's unvaccinated. So think about that from a logical perspective, right? If there's no difference immunologically between somebody getting or transmitting the disease if you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, there was no scientific basis or reason for the mandates whatsoever. Right? It was all political, right? So all of those things were political, and all these little committees, these little propaganda committees, well, we got to convince people that this is real, and we got to scare everybody, and what a better way to scare and coerce people than telling them that we're not going to let them fly, we're not going to let them travel, we're not going to, blah, 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 we're going to make you prisoners in your own homes if you don't get vaccinated, all that bullshit that they were doing to people, right? And it was all without any scientific basis whatsoever, and they knew it. Or should have known it.
That's when JP Sears had this video that went viral, Clyde. Remember? I mean, JP was the guy, he's a comedian who had the life jacket, and he made the viral video that my life jacket doesn't work unless you wear your life jacket. And as ridiculous as that sounds, then when you say, well, my vaccine doesn't work unless you use your vaccine, you go, yeah, it's
and the reality,
we're all speaking the same language.
In vaccine language, right? They call this a leaky vaccine, and they call this a really leaky vaccine because it made no difference whether or not like if you had the vaccine, whether you got the disease or not. And now with the Cleveland Clinic study that came out last year, that demonstrated that the more shots and the more boosters you get, the more likely you are to contract COVID, the more likely you are to be hospitalized for COVID, the worse your overall health outcomes are, the more shots and boosters you get, right? That's not being publicized. And the government's trying to bury that study and trying to pretend that it doesn't mean anything. And they're still selling the damn boosters, right?
Well, it's crazy because the whole narrative started off, get it, you won't get it. Like you get that shot, you won't get the thing. And then it's like, well, maybe you could get the thing, but you won't be able to spread it. Okay, maybe you can spread it, but
you won't get as sick. You won't get as sick.
But it won't be as bad. Okay, well, it might be worse.
Right? Yeah.
What's the point?
But the Cleveland Clinic study, if you haven't read it, you really should look it up and take a look at it. Because what Cleveland Clinic was really interesting. So unlike Mayo, unlike AHS, whatever, Cleveland Clinic did not bring in any mandates and didn't fire or lay off any staff that refused to get vaccinated, right? So they maintained they had a really big, robust set of people that they could use as effectively as a placebo group, right? So they had a big control group that they could use for this study. So they looked at the health outcomes of their 10,000 unvaccinated employees versus their 45,000 vaccinated employees. And the numbers were shocking in terms of how much worse the health outcomes were for the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated Cleveland Clinic employees. I mean, it's a really high-powered study. I mean, it's a statistical set of, I think it was, 59,000 people. Right, with at least it was 10 to 15,000 unvaccinated versus the balance vaccinated. Right, so anybody that still thinks that these shots should be given to kids needs to read the Pfizer EUA table 14. And needs to read the Cleveland Clinic study. I mean, continuing to give these shots to kids, as far as I'm concerned, is criminal.
Totally.
Wow.
Or go visit an African country like Nigeria, where you tell them what we did in our country, and they laugh at us. There was no COVID in Nigeria because there was no government, no media, no news. I mean, people walking around not doing their daily thing in Nigeria had no idea COVID was going on.
My favorite was the president of Tanzania that was sending in samples from mangoes and goats and papayas and all this stuff. And the WHO was telling him that the mangoes and the papayas and the goats all had COVID. And then he needed to institute national lockdowns in Nigeria because COVID was rampant on the basis of the papaya samples that he sent in.
Jeff, I got to get more information on this because I knew about propaganda that the military was doing, but I had no idea there was an instance where Trudeau himself was the one behind it. Because there was a case in Nova Scotia where they sent out leaflets telling people, this was during COVID, that they were reintroducing wolves into the area. It was totally BS. They didn't do it. They didn't reintroduce wolves, and they put out these leaflets, and they even opened up an office like of wildlife and habitat. And then a few weeks later, they went out, and instead of reassuring them that nothing was going on, they said, "Oh, the wolves are there. It seems there's too many of them, and now it's becoming a bit of an issue. But don't worry, just don't go outside at night, and don't go outside if you hear any wolves." Then they went and they put speakers around people's homes and made wolf noises.
Are you serious?
This is the Canadian military. The I think it was the Ottawa citizen that broke this story.
Wow.
They went around and they were haranguing and harassing citizens with these wolf noises to scare them and keep them in their homes as a military project. It was all based on the idea of doing psychological warfare, and they were practicing on Canadian citizens.
Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all, right? And I guess this is sort of by way of background. One of the reasons that I'm so involved in this or so personally invested in all this COVID stuff was my dad was a very senior public health official, right? Back in the day, right? And like he literally was. When he passed away, he was the senior consultant to the deputy minister on public health in Canada. So literally under the structure of Health and Welfare Canada at the time, Dad would have been the equivalent of Theresa Tam, right? And he was involved in actually shutting down the swine flu vaccine program after it killed 50 people, right? And here, here's Theresa Tam and all these people, right? They've now admitted to killing 10,000 people, right? Seriously injuring 10,000 people and killing over 400. I think that the number is probably closer to 1,000 that they've admitted, that they'd have to admit to now. But they've admitted, at least on paper that I've seen, over 400 people and seriously injured over 10,000 that they've admitted to. We all know the numbers are way higher than that, right? Like in my office alone, 10 people. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, your office. Clyde and I got to meet Omar Sheikh in Vancouver, and I'm sure he's a colleague of yours, I think, right? Or what are you guys called? But yeah, you guys you're representing between him and you and others thousands of people now.
Oh, no. But what I was going to say, and this is just interesting, in my office alone, notwithstanding the work we were doing, 10 of our staff ended up getting the vaccine because our policy was talk to your doctors, everybody make up your own minds, whatever. We're not telling you what to do. None of our goddamn business.
It's up to you.
Your body, your choice, whatever. Right. So out of, the people in our office, 10 people got vaccinated. Out of 10 people, fully 3 out of 10 immediately following the shot had symptoms of myocarditis, and one of our senior counsels has been now diagnosed through contrasting MRIs with myocarditis and vasculitis related to the vaccines. So in our office, we had a 30% myocarditis rate from the in and around the vaccines. So the number is way higher than they're admitting to. And I mean, just looking at the numbers of people that are contacting our office with regard to vaccine injuries, a lot of anecdotal. And again, people, it's anecdotal evidence. Well, guess what? Anecdotal evidence is still evidence, right? So it's a question of how much weight you put on it, but it's still evidence, right? So this summer I was talking to a University of Calgary hockey player who a young woman who now has to go and get her heart checked every 3 months because she was vaccinated and had some symptoms. And fully 3 people that she knows that played collegiate level hockey now can't play any collegiate level sport ever again because of the myocarditis that they contracted was so bad that they can't do sports anymore, right? Wow. And keep in mind, all of these young men and women were forced to get those vaccines in order to continue with their university program or continue to train as university athletes. It was forced on them. And they were severely injured, and a lot of them, from what I've heard, now can't even participate in sports because of the damage that was done to their hearts, from these so-called safe and effective vaccines that they never should have gotten in the first place, because statistically, none of those kids were, I refer to them as kids, but 18 to 25-year-olds were ever going to die from COVID anyway. Statistically, it was, it didn't happen.
You needed to go to 6 decimal places. I mean, the survivability.
Yeah, no,
COVID,
exactly, right?
Yeah. No, I bring this up to people. I remember many times in the last 20 years where Alberta would pull every head of lettuce off the shelf because 3 people would have salmonella. You know, somebody would eat romaine lettuce somewhere, and then 3 people get sick, and boom, all the salmonella is gone.
Everything's gone.
But you know, 100 people get injured by the vaccine, and it's still on the shelf, and it's still being promoted, which is one of the things that in my circle, people are frustrated that it's still being offered to children under the age of 6 months. That's you're right.
I think that it's being offered to anybody under the age of 18. Any minor child should not be getting this shot.
Right.
Any healthy-bodied,
right.
Somebody who's.
The evidence is, the Pfizer's own data indicates that these shots are not safe for kids, right? Compared to the risk associated with COVID. And keep in mind that when Pfizer released that data where they said notionally 1 child per million was going to die from COVID, right? That was like alpha wave COVID. That was early COVID. That was the stuff that they were claiming was stacking up bodies in the hallways in New York, and whether you believe any of that stuff or not, whatever. But I mean, we all know, that, in a post-Omicron world, the mortality rate associated with post-Delta wave COVID has gone down substantially. So if you were to look at those numbers now, the mortality and morbidity associated with the vaccines has remained constant, but the mortality and morbidity associated with COVID has gone down exponentially. So there's even less of a case for it now, given that COVID is so much less lethal than it was, in its earliest incarnations, which is, the
natural progression of any of this stuff.
The virus.
We've all started doing our studying and researching.
Right.
And, great source for this Dark Horse podcast. Heather and Brett Weinstein. They're evolutionary biologists in virology. They're a perfect show to observe about this stuff, and they talk about this. They say any novel virus is always going to trend in the direction of being more transmissible but safer for the host.
The virus doesn't want to kill its host. It's counterintuitive. It needs hosts. It needs more hosts.
Well, and again, it's in terms of the long-term survivability of the virus. It wants to mutate to become more transmissible and less lethal, because if you kill your host too quickly, you can't propagate yourself further, right? It's just how they work. And of course, we're very early on in all this COVID stuff. I was very fortunate that, to be able to avail myself of a lot of, world-class experts, including, Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford, guys like Roger Hodgkinson, who is a board certified, Royal Fellow pathologist, on and on and on and on. I mean, I had access to all of these top flight, medical experts, that were advising me on all this stuff from day one on COVID. And, so I got a really, really good education on, all of these things that we're talking about very early on. And I'm arguing this stuff in court, and the court's looking at, well, that can't be true. The government says it's safe. The government says it's effective. Like, why would I listen to you or all these Stanford educated people that you rely on, because they shouldn't be listened to, because they're disagreeing with, people that are employed by the government of Canada, because obviously if you're a government bureaucrat, you've got to be smarter than anybody, right? That was, in effect, the attitude that we were getting from the court, right? Like, it was pretty shocking, to be honest.
I had to highlight this comment. It's just too good. Smitty25 says politicians require a host. Yes, they're a parasite, and they're quickly becoming one of those ones that are detrimental to the host in Canada. Anyway, that's very.
I don't
very
call
good
politicians
analogy there.
I always correct people who say politicians are the elite class. No, they're the parasitic class, man. Like,
absolutely. Absolutely. Let's get to a couple more of these super chats. Javelin Blue for $10 says, I got really sick after the vax. I also got sick because the doctors misdiagnosed me with a jaw infection, and that I still have, and Lyme's disease. That's another one. I don't know what is the deal with Lyme's disease, and why has it been this thing where people said it's not a real thing, and then it is, and then what is?
It's just one of those weird diseases that manifests itself very differently from people to people to people. It's an interesting one. There's some great documentaries on Lyme disease. It's one that scares me.
Yeah, we always check ourselves for ticks. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I spent a lot. Yeah, exactly. I spent a lot of time.
Because if you catch it early enough, apparently, and I can't remember what antibiotic it is, but if you get a real high dose of one particular antibiotic, it'll keep you from getting it. But if they don't catch it earlier, we have a friend of the family, his son that was on track to become a physician, like, top of his class, straight A student, et cetera, developed a really bad case of Lyme disease after a tick bite, and he's barely slogging his way through life anymore, given the mental impairment and all the difficulty that he suffered as a result of it. It's a really horrible disease.
Yeah,
that's awful.
But
Javelin also adding to this, saying, I like all three of you, but you're delusional that the conservative government will push the liberals for this or punish the
you know
liberals
what? I mean, I don't necessarily disagree, because there's a lot of bureaucrats in between, in between common sense and the government. And, and the other point is, as far as that goes, never count on an elected government to do the right thing. But that having said, governments do respond to political pressure, and they do respond, believe it or not, to constituents. So, and I know that Danielle Smith particularly is very responsive to her base. So if you're in Alberta, please flood Danielle Smith's office with emails and let her know what you think, because she, unlike a lot of other politicians in Canada, she seems to pay attention.
She's going to be pretty sick of Marty very soon. Marty's not shy to speak out.
No, and that's right. We're glad to have people like you, Marty, on our team. So,
well, that's the way to be. And like, I get a lot of people saying like, "Oh, I can't wait till Clyde backpedals all the things he said about the Conservatives." I've said from day one, when the Conservatives get into power federally, I'm going to go hard on making sure that they hold to their promises, because that's what we need to see. If otherwise, there's no point. There's no point.
Yeah.
And let's keep in mind that the deep state, when you talk about ticks, they're burrowed in there really deeply. And if you want to talk about the real parasites, let's talk about the bureaucracy, right? Mm-hmm. Who have it in their heads that they're not public servants, but are public masters, right? And if you get back to my earlier, comments about, how the army of 5,000, 6,000 constitutional lawyers employed by various departments of justice across the country, the bureaucrats control them and control that litigation. And they've gotten our Supreme Court through shaping the law to effectively say that any administrative decision, made by, bureaucrats acting reasonably shouldn't be overturned by the courts, because the bureaucrats are expert in what they do and nobody should second guess what they do, right?
No.
That's judge-made law. And all of us need to be pressuring, politicians like Danielle Smith, who are willing to listen to the people, to have statutes and have legislation passed overturning some of these Supreme Court decisions, like the Doré decision and the Vavilov decision, that effectively make bureaucrats and bureaucratic decision making all but untouchable by the average citizen, right? Mm. That can be done through the statute book, and we need to really push. And I know these are really sort of esoteric things that most people don't think about, but that's the type of thing that we need to be pushing our governments to do, which is to roll back the power of the bureaucracy through statutory, through legislation, because it's gone way too far.
Sure,
but Javier Milei, like Argentina, to come in, Abuela, and get rid of a lot of these bureaucracies.
Yeah, I've actually written Substacks on this, like early on, like talking about and with specific reference to specific Supreme Court decisions that should be overturned by statute. And I've even provided proposed, I think it was in advance of the AGM last year, I was providing proposed legislative language to be adopted by policy at the Alberta AGM. And of course, I was being told by all the powers that be in this is all too complicated, and you can't ask all of our dumb conservative members to consider these kind of legal things, and we don't want this on the floor at the AGM because heaven forbid that any poor farmer rancher comes. It was just like that, right? They treat us all like we're a bunch of stupid sheep and nobody can think for themselves, right?
Terrible.
Oh yeah, no, it's completely condescending, right? It's welcome to party politics in Alberta, right?
This is why I shout it from the hilltops, and people catch the message. This is popular. This is a way of doing things. You start talking about stuff, people realize what you're talking about. They're not dumb. People are not dumb, and eventually things get done. Things and
Yeah,
things
and I mean,
have
and I have to say credit to Danielle Smith. Some of the ideas that I proposed in my Substack, and I also put them forward to Preston Manning and his committee, and with Jack Major and the rest of it. Some of the things that I proposed are now being incorporated into Alberta law, like the amendments to the Bill of Rights to actually make property rights in the Bill of Rights substantive rather than procedural, and to put a specific provision into the Alberta Bill of Rights in the Property Act section, preventing Trudeau from seizing or outlawing any form of firearm in the province of Alberta. Because I mean, it should be outside the scope of the federal criminal law. I mean, sure, you can pass laws saying, if you use a firearm in the commission of an offense, we're going to lock you up in jail for 25 years. That's fine. But to say, if you own a certain type of firearm, we're going to declare you a criminal and seize your property and take it away from you, that entrenches on property and civil rights in the province under Section 92, of 9213 of the BNA Act, and shouldn't be allowed. It's impermissible. And there's actually Alberta Court of Appeal authority on that point. So I was really glad to see that those suggestions of mine seem to have been picked up by the legislature, and they're now going to make their way into the Bill of Rights.
Well, and the other thing I was going to say, you were talking about, the powers between the executive branch and the legislative branch and stuff like that. Like, one of the things that we were worried about, a lot of people were worried when you won your case, that the government that Danielle could see that as as a reason to change the law. People always said that, you found that the laws were illegal, or whatever you call it in what's the term you use? Ultra vires. And people said, well, you're just giving the government, the solution to change the laws, but they didn't, right? So after you won your case, Danielle adjusted the laws, but correctly, I would say. Am I misreading that?
But that being said, no. But I mean, the law needs to be, I think, further amended. I think they're doing that now through the Bill of Rights. Again, I would like to think further to suggestions that I've made to make it clear that where people's property rights are interfered with in the way they were interfered with through the pandemic, that people are entitled as a matter of right to compensation.
Right.
Which unfortunately, to now, we say that there's a right to compensation both under the Emergencies Act and the, and the Public Health Act. But because of what Kenny did by doing what they did illegally, right, by, making these phony orders that they pretended were doctor's orders as opposed to cabinet orders, they put themselves in the glue legally, from the standpoint of, creating liability for misfeasance in public office, negligence, et cetera, that's going to cost the government billions at the end of the day, which suits me just fine.
Right. So. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, we got a couple more super chats here. What did I miss? I just want to make sure. This was a question that we heard earlier that I actually brought up. Janice Pollard for $5 says, what about the trades? Subcontractors were completely restricted from working, but not recognized as small businesses. I think you answered that pretty well.
Yeah, earlier. And I mean, that's a tougher one, but I think that, if a subcontractor could show that they were restricted from working as a result of an order, that they would be able to claim, through our lawsuit in Alberta. But everybody needs to remember that the lawsuit that we're bringing on business restrictions is Alberta only, because Alberta, because of the Ingram decision and the case that we won in Alberta is in a fairly unique position legally.
Nicholas LeBlanc for $5 says, $5 for the cause. It's important, in my opinion, to support each other in ways that may be meaningful. We all fight in our own ways. Beauty will save the world.
Well, that's very nice.
That is very nice. Brenda Wive with a $2.79 super chat. Wow. Please keep us up to date on this, Clyde. Yes, this is my plan. I do want to keep this one up to date because things move slow in courts, but we every once in a while hear news comes out And Jeff is happy to keep us not only informed but entertained in the whole process of letting us know about it. So definitely thanks so much for that, Jeff. Carla, member for 13 months, says you can sue. Can you sue doctors or nurse practitioners for negligence, or can you only complain to the College of Physicians?
No, you can sue them for sure. And especially. And one of the big areas of liability, we haven't pursued it because, again, it's just, there's only so much we can do as a small office. But a lawsuit that I had a lot of interest in was suing pharmacies, like suing Rexall or suing Shoppers Drug Mart or these places that were actually administering the shots without warning people about the side effects. Like think about it, any pharmacist who's supposedly an expert in pharmacology, that's sticking a shot in the arm of a kid that doesn't tell the parents those two things that I told you. Oh yeah, but by the way, before I stick this shot in your kid's arm, know that Pfizer's data indicates that the shot's more likely to kill your kid than COVID. And also know that Pfizer's own data indicates that your child's 4 times more likely to contract a disease that's 600% more likely to kill them than COVID. Do you still want me to go ahead? Right? Like,
were there guys
well, that's the whole point. I mean, that's a different issue altogether. But at the same time, I still think that that pharmacies have massive liability. For pharmacists, we're sticking these shots in arms at Shoppers and Rexall and various large chain pharmacies in Alberta. That there is liability, but I mean that is the real scandal as far as I'm concerned. Is the degree to which the colleges of physicians and surgeons, the colleges of nursing, the colleges of psychiatry, pharmacy, et cetera, were literally going after any member of theirs that dared to question, vaccine orthodoxy. Were filing complaints against them for unprofessional conduct. Like I represented all kinds of of doctors in Alberta, that were being persecuted by the college, right? I mean, I think Eric Payne's case was very publicly known, and both of the so-called misinformation complaints against Eric were very quietly withdrawn, right? Because they didn't, because of the massive embarrassment, I think that would rise to the college from, not being able to prove that Eric said anything that was wrong. Because
in
of
British
course,
Columbia, they just got rid of the function of the colleges. They just made them government appointees.
Well, there you go.
I'm not kidding. Bill's 36 did that. Got rid of.
They need to do that in Alberta. Like it's so bad in Alberta that the College of Physicians, and I know this because whistleblowers contacted our office, but the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Alberta literally fired all of their unvaccinated employees, and they fired them without cause. They told them they were being, like they didn't try to allege cause for not being vaccinated. They just told them they were being fired because their values did not align with the values of the college, and they were all paid double severance. And I mean, none of this went through, cabinet. None of this went through legislature. I mean, the college, which is largely paid for by the doctors themselves, paid double severance to employees that wouldn't get vaccinated to get rid of them because they didn't want these untrustworthy, unvaccinated people keeping an eye on what those little slime balls were doing within the college, right?
That's disgusting.
And no, it is. It's despicable. I mean, it's completely despicable. And then I think it was very public and notorious in Alberta. It made the papers. But I mean, I jokingly said one day that, on a Zoom call with AHS that they were asking me, oh, why aren't you wearing a mask? It's like I'm in a Zoom room in my office, and so I just merrily said, "Oh, I have a vaccine, I have a mask exemption." And of course, in the back of my mind, like, yeah, I'm exempt from stupidity, but okay, whatever, right? But the very next day, I swear to God, the College of Physicians and Surgeons sent a raid team to my doctor's office, raided my doctor's office. The first file they pulled was mine. And goddamn well that the College of Physicians and Surgeons was there looking to see if my doctor actually wrote a vaccine exemption for me and put it on my chart so that they could go after my doctor for writing an illegal vaccine exemption for me. Oh yeah, no, it was Gestapo time in Alberta, right? Like, it was it was pretty nasty. And then
And
on
if you
top
think
of it,
it can't happen again, you're kidding yourself, honestly.
oh no, I know. And then on top of it, I mean, it was just despicable, because the doctor that the college had hired to raid my physician's office I need to be careful about my language, because I'll end up in a complaint to the Law Society, but was a doctor from Edmonton who formerly worked from Covenant Health, okay, who was fired for boundary violations because after being warned repeatedly not to sleep with his subordinates, continued sleeping with one of his subordinates. So this doctor with boundary violations is the one raiding my doctor's office and sticking his nose in my medical file, right? Like, this is, welcome to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta. I mean, it's just it's just disgusting the way that organization
The whole institution
operates.
doesn't look good.
The CPSA needs to be completely disbanded by our government. Everybody that's there needs to be fired, and there needs to be some robust. There needs to be some robust legislation that's passed, in order to regulate the medical profession in Alberta. And let's face it, let's stick to the basics, right? Like, doctors that sexually interfere with patients, doctors that, misprescribe opiates, doctors that, that are grossly negligent, et cetera, all need to be dealt with. But the idea that, that the College of Physicians and Surgeons needs to have a role as the thought police, policing, the thoughts and opinions of the medical profession to fit within some form of orthodoxy, like Jordan Peterson was going through in Ontario. Needs to, going full circle now and coming back to Jordan, needs to be legislated out of existence. It's just gone way too far.
Well, I mean, back to me being an engineer, I find my association sort of does it okay, right? They certify me as an engineer. They verify that I understand thermodynamics, stresses, mechanics, things like that. But after that, my association doesn't. When I'm solving a problem, if I'm solving a problem for you, they don't say what kind of paint I use or what kind of metals. That's up to me, right? So, and I can't imagine, like, the comparable would be the College of Surgeons telling a doctor you can't use ivermectin. That doesn't resonate with me. That seems completely ridiculous,
Well, and keep in mind, like, all of the doctors that are at the College of Physicians and Surgeons all still have their medical licenses, right? And none of them are
practicing. British Columbia.
What's that?
Except in British Columbia, after Bill 36.
They
don't even have to be doctors. They're just
no. But my point is, you have doctors at the College of Physicians and Surgeons that haven't practiced medicine for years, right? That still have active medical licenses, and they're basically just bureaucrats, right? But they can still prescribe, they can still do whatever the hell they want. But if there was any other doctor in the province that had been out of practice for 10 years or 12 years or 20 years, they say, wait a minute, what are you doing writing prescriptions? You're not up to date. You're going to have to requalify. You're going to have to resit all of your medical exams. You're going to have to go back to university, blah, 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 whatever it is, to requalify as a doctor because you're so far out of date with your medical skills, right? But no, I mean, their rules don't apply to themselves, right? All these bureaucrats that are at the college and medical ethics don't apply to them. Right? Like, it's, clear, and I repeatedly wrote this letter to the college during the pandemic about informed consent, saying, wait a minute, this is what, the standard of practice says with regard to informed consent, and that is that people have to be given all of the information, consent is to be, fully informed, not subject of, the subject of coercion, et cetera, inducements, whatever it is. So can you please tell me on this basis how it is that you can be allowing, doctors at AHS like Verna Yu and others to be enforcing these dictates that effectively tell other doctors that if they actually try to give patients informed consent and tell them that the vaccines are more dangerous than COVID for their children, you're going to lift their medical licenses. How are you not violating your own standards of practice and your own medical ethics by doing that? Right. And I never got, it's just crickets, right? Never got an answer to that question. And it's clear that, that everything that they were doing in and around informed consent was completely unethical and completely flew in the face of their own standards of practice. And they wouldn't entertain any complaints against Verna Yu or Dina Hinshaw or any of them for violating those codes of conduct. But, they would persecute guys like Eric Payne and raid my doctor's office and do all the other, heinous Gestapo-like bullshit that they were doing, on an ongoing basis, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely insane. I get to more of these super chats. Penny D for $5 says, I'm one of those ones who didn't super chat, Marty. Thanks. Well, you just did. Linda Hunter gifting membership to the channel. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Solar with a $5 super chat. Is Jeff on Twitter or /X? Are you on Twitter?
No, I cannot have a Twitter account because my sense of humor often gets the best of me. So I need to try not to put a lot of this foolishness in writing.
Oh, that's too funny. That's too funny. I like that answer. Daifeichu with a $5 super chat. The inventor of the PCR test, Nobel Prize winner Carrie Mullis, said it cannot be used to test for viruses. We were shut down over a fake test.
There's no doubt about that. And then there was the whole issue of how many cycles they were running the test at, and and the fact that you didn't have, you didn't have any set standard for how these tests were to be used and operated. I mean, the whole thing was just. Was just atrocious from start to finish.
But getting back to usually, because you had to go travel, you'd bring like 4 PCR tests just in case there's a false positive or something like that. I gotta go there.
Yeah. But getting back to that earlier question of whether I was on Twitter or X, I do have a Substack for anybody that wants to find it and read it. It's called Conspiracy Facts with Jeffrey Rath. And, it's, I write generally on Alberta politics, local politics, Canadian politics, et cetera. I've kind of taken about a 3 or 4 month hiatus just because I've been so busy with class action litigation lately, but I'm going to get back to writing again. And it's generally a lot of fun. You can read I think there's 45 or 50 Substacks that I've published. And again, it's Conspiracy Facts with Jeffrey Rath. And a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of COVID, in terms of, in terms of some of the legal issues that we're talking about, all of those things have been written about on an ongoing basis. And what I would like to think is a fairly humorous and entertaining manner if anybody's interested in reading them.
Yeah, one of our moderators, Solar, just put it in the chat there. So anybody who's interested in going to check that out, the link is right there for you. We also have Gordon Heffernan with a $5 super chat. I'm a pureblood, he says. Bonnie Henry is a communist. I will never trust any government or doctor again. Vote Conservative in BC. Yes, vote Conservative in BC. The election is tomorrow. Final voting is tomorrow. Get out there and get your vote in. We need you. We need you out there, everybody. Absolutely. Karen McLeod with a $2 super chat. And another one. Thank you so much for the tips there. Robert McFallon with a $5 super chat says, this has been amongst your best Friday live streams. All 3 of you are legends. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate
thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Sean with a $6.99 super chat says, any insight on 300 people fired from CRA over CERB? Not a ton of insight. I just know that like that was it. They're like, okay, zip it. They got fired. A bunch of them got reprimanded. Was it? They got a slap on the wrist. It's funny because
my only comment would be 300 down. 300 down, 5,000 to go. That's all.
Right, but like, how do you get a slap on the wrist for fraud? It's like it's either fraud or it's not fraud. It's not like he kind of committed fraud. It's fraud. Fraud's fraud.
Yeah. I think in fairness to some of them, there was there may have been enough of a gray area that was being litigated in and around it. I mean, I just out of the corner of my eye saw this one court case. I mean, I think I don't think the courts went so far as to say it was fraudulent. I think they had an arguable case, but it went against them, in terms of the way the rules were worded or whatever it was. But, so you want to be careful throwing the F word around, I think, a little bit, so. I think there was enough ambiguity there, but I think certainly from a CRA perspective, they felt that the people that, that were working within CRA and were, sort of playing with the rules to collect CERB when it was that close to the line, deserved to be fired. So what the hell, like I said, 300 down, 5,000 to go.
Yeah.
But not one perp walk. That's just that troubles me so much that every time government employees, if there is fraud, they're fired. The RCMP are never called in to pick them up at the door. Try that at any other employee. Try that at any private employee where you defraud your boss.
Well, let's get back to my business class action, right? I mean, and I don't want to say that it was fraud, but I mean, if evidence comes out that Jason Kenney and members of his cabinet knew full well that what they were doing was illegal, right? And, that they didn't have the statutory authority to do what they were doing, but intentionally were hiding behind Dina Hinshaw and pretending, that those orders were medical orders for their own particular political purposes, specifically not to be accountable to their constituents for shutting down their businesses and destroying their businesses. I mean, that's getting pretty close to the edge, if, to the F word, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, what else do you call it? Right. I mean, it certainly fits within the definition of misfeasance in public office, which is, it's a very short skip and a jump from the F word,
Well, and that's why I was asking earlier what are the possibilities of criminal charges coming afterwards? Because
I mean, the reality of it is that Jason Kenney, as a highly paid consultant to the Bennett Jones law firm in Calgary, is very unlikely to ever be indicted for anything.
Well, look at what happened to Jacinda Ardern or whatever, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand this week. She got a medal. She's now
look at Timothy Caulfield, one of the biggest living misinformationists in Canada. He got the Order of Canada for all the misinformation and disinformation that he spewed in and around the vaccines. Interestingly, this is really interesting. A good friend of mine recently attended a symposium at Stanford University. It was held about 2 weeks ago, and it was a massive. And I'm trying to remember the title of it. It was something about the pandemic, learning from our past to pave the way forward. So Stanford University, and it was actually instituted by my friend Jay Bhattacharya, who invited renowned academics from all over the United States to discuss what lessons could have been learned from the pandemic. And they invited people from all sides of the debate, people that were pro-vax, anti-vax, whatever, to have this open discussion in the form of a symposium at Stanford University, right? And of course, Tim Caulfield was invited, right? He declined to attend. Fissman's fraud, of course, he was invited to attend. He declined to attend. All of these people that were involved in misinformation and disinformation in Canada were invited to attend, this symposium at Stanford. And of course, all of them declined to attend because they knew full well that they would not stand up to high-level academic scrutiny at Stanford University, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, this was put on by the entire university. And the introduction, apparently, to this thing came from the president of the university, who was talking about how excited he was that Stanford was having this symposium, but at the same time, how shocked and disappointed he was that people that had been such strong proponents of the the non-pharmaceutical interventions, like all the lockdowns and bullshit and the vaccines, et cetera, notwithstanding the fact that they were all invited to attend this serious academic conference, all declined to attend. And of course, why else would they decline to attend other than they know full well that the things that they were espousing throughout the pandemic were completely debunked, and that any attendance by them at a symposium of this nature would just lead to personal embarrassment. So none of them attended. But apparently that symposium is online. I don't have the link for it right now, but if somebody can find it, I would highly recommend it to your viewers, because all of the debate and discussion, is available online and people can watch it. And it's basically all of the leading scientists from across the United States and Canada, with regard to all of the problems with the NPIs, the vaccine programs, et cetera, where they're speaking to these things. And interestingly, I've heard a rumor that people are in the process of trying to organize something similar in Canada. So I'm really looking forward to that happening.
Yeah, I'd love to see that happen. Absolutely. Moving on, Penny D with a $10 super chat. Suspicious of Tam as far as the commercial about we've come too far to come now. That sentence doesn't sound like it is directed to us. Also,
we've
ads
come too far to come now. Is that even English? Like, what the hell does that mean?
I don't know. Is that a typo?
Yeah, that might have been a typo of some sort, but yeah.
Also, ads came out too quickly about the COVID. Yeah.
But don't forget, but getting onto the subject of Theresa Tam, I actually wrote a Substack about this because it was just so bizarre.
To clarify.
Come too far to stop now.
Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah.
There we go. But on the side, and that does make sense in the context of Theresa Tam. But keep in mind that dear Theresa Tam issued this massive report last year, right? That declared climate change to be Canada's great next public health emergency. So climate change has now been declared by Theresa Tam to be a public health emergency, right? And interestingly, for Canadians paying attention to this, the leading causes of climate change, according to Theresa Tam, are, get this, capitalism, ableism, and heteronormativity, right? So,
the market economy.
All of us, anybody that's interested in working in the market economy, that's able-bodied and is interested in having a family, we all need to be stamped out in the name of climate change. I guess that's the whole point of universal basic income.
I mean, those things, those things she mentioned increase the life expectancy of humans from 50, 100 years ago to 82, but no, we're gonna.
We have to stamp out capitalism, ableism, and heteronormativity because it all contributes to climate change, right?
Absolutely.
The statement though, we've come too far to stop now. It kind of reminds me, the old guys that say I've been doing it this way my whole life.
This is the communist revolution, right? We're almost there. We just got to get over that last hump and get 16-year-olds to vote in universal basic income. So that when you turn 16 or 16, you can vote yourself $2,000 a month for life at the age of 17 without ever having to work, get a job, get educated, plan to have a job, plan to get educated, without any plan whatsoever to become a productive member of society. Everybody should just be given free money from the government. Leaving aside who's going to be left to pay for all this so-called free money that they all think, exists by the waving of a magic money, fairy wand, right? It's just bizarre, right? It's just
I've got a book that I love to share with everybody. I've been going through a second reading of it. It's called Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. It's a very old book, but it still holds out today. It's a short read. It's a really good one. And it lays out all of these arguments that communists or socialists would lay out to you and just demolishes them. And very systematically. It's such a great book. I can't recommend it enough. Everybody get out there and give it to your commie friends. Just say, just humor me. Read this. It's an easy one.
It's in really simple language. Even you can follow along. Right?
Exactly. I'll get some more super chats here. Mr. Live Line Solutions with a $2 super chat says, 300 scapegoats to save $200 million for the Liberals. Yeah, that's where we're at. It's insane. G Meister with a $10 super chat says, clarification: if Comrade Hinshaw knew she was misleading the public, how can she walk away with no legal ramifications?
Yeah, I hear you on that. I mean, the fact that she's being pilloried on an ongoing basis in public, I think, is all the satisfaction that we're going to get. Because there's an old saying in law school: you don't sue a man of straw. I guess in these days you'd say person of straw. But the idea being that the amount of damage that she's caused to the Alberta economy, right, is so extensive that she could never pay for it in a million lifetimes. So there's no point in suing her because it's just brings in another level of complications that we don't need to deal with, in the context of the action. And she's named in both of our lawsuits. She's named in the business class action, and she's named in the, vaccine class action. And every day we're in court, believe me, straw man, exactly. But every day we're in court, believe me, her name is brought up as being as being the leading proponent or the leading architect of all of this negligence. Because I mean, again, think about it. Anybody that has sympathy for Dina Hinshaw, from the standpoint of she was just doing the best she could and whatever. I mean, I asked the question: how incompetent does somebody have to be to not know what their authority is to shut down billions of dollars worth of economic activity? One would think that if you're engaging in decisions that that affect billions of dollars worth of economic activity, you would have a very firm grasp of what your statutory authority is to do that. And obviously Dina Hinshaw didn't. She just deferred to Jason Kenney and friends and had them tell her what to do, and then literally stood up as their shill in public, pretending that she was the one making the decisions when she was just a mouthpiece for cabinet. And that's a fact. I mean, that's what the courts have found. And that's not hyperbole. That's what happened.
I don't even have words for that.
Right? Yeah, I mean, how grossly incompetent you have to be. I also remind people that, I don't think everybody in the public knows that Dina Hinshaw has the distinction of being the only chief medical officer of health in Alberta to be fired from a position within the Alberta government twice in 1 year.
Yeah.
Right. She gets fired the first time, and then her friends at AHS tried to sneak her in through a back door. And when people found out about it, they were justifiably outraged, and she was fired again. Like, people just don't want her in this province.
No, and like you said, her name is mentioned in court all the time. But I also deeply think, I truly think that the harm that they've done, we're not done seeing it. Whether it's vaccine injuries or the myocarditis, like, people keep saying, oh, that's just anecdotal or hearsay. I'm like, no, I look at the data and I know we're going to see it. Like, it's going to become a part of our lives.
Well,
we won't be able to ignore it, right? People will say,
it's irrefutable. 4,000% increase in excess deaths since the vaccine, since the advent of the vaccines. 4,000%.
Yeah, like, people are making excuses. They're going, oh, my kid's tired while playing hockey. Someday they won't be able to make an excuse anymore. They'll say, yeah, my kid's injured. He's never been the same after the vaccine. They're still in denial. Millions of people are still in denial.
Oh, my favorite is every time you read a headline that says doctors are baffled by the sudden increase in cardiac, in cardiac complications in young men under the age of 30. They're baffled, right? Like, sure, right? And then, it's just, the level of denial that the medical profession is going through right now. And I say at the instance of the vaccine injury. I mean, of the vaccine industry, right? Because it's pretty clear to me that there's still a pretty strong ongoing propaganda campaign that's being waged, in terms of bullshit articles being published and, suggesting that, vaccine injuries aren't vaccine injuries, they're COVID complications, long COVID,
long COVID.
Long COVID. I mean, I actually asked, this is kind of funny, when we were doing the Hinshaw case, they had some, it was a microchemist who then started writing some papers in and around, because he wanted to get on the COVID gravy train, started writing papers with microbiologists so he could then call himself an expert in COVID, the COVID virus, even though he had no real background in biology or microbiology or whatever it was. And we're cross-examining him during the Hinshaw case. And I asked him, I said, okay, you've just gratuitously 3, 4, 5 times mentioned long COVID. I said, do you have any data or do you have any evidence that these cases that you refer to as long COVID aren't vaccine injuries? So then he literally yells at me over, through Zoom, that's a trope. And I said, I beg your pardon, sir, but that's not a trope. I said, that's a question. His response to that was, your question's a trope, right? And it was that level of bullshit that we were dealing with. Where, wow. You ask them a straight question and they won't give you a straight answer. And they just, they try to pretend that somehow that even asking the question, it's like, just asking the question constitutes an exercise in misinformation. Right?
Unbelievable.
And Oh yeah, no, but I mean that's the level and quality of evidence that the government was presenting in the Ingram case. And another case we were doing, they co-opted a Nobel laureate by the name of Sir Michael Houghton, who's with the Li Ka-shing Institute of Virology in Edmonton. I call it the Li Ka-ching Institute. You know, Caulfield's associated with them now, and they're all raking in the dough, debunking, you know, all of us, right, et cetera, et cetera. But this, you know, this Nobel laureate, Sir Michael Houghton, prostituted his Nobel laureate to file an affidavit saying that COVID would not be eradicated until every single human being on the planet was vaccinated for COVID, right? And I mean, we cross-examined him on that. And I'm going, wait a minute. I said, let's just examine that statement, right? I said, first of all, isn't that kind of like saying, you know, a beauty queen contestant coming up on stage saying that, you know, that she prays for world peace. I said, how are you ever going to get everybody on the planet vaccinated, right? I mean, that's kind of a non-starter. I said, you know, like war-torn Somalia, Eritrea, you're going to get everybody vaccinated? Come on, that's not going to happen. Well, and then he goes right into, well, I have family in South Africa, and people in South Africa are very pro-vax, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this is a Nobel laureate pretending to do science, right, in favor of government propaganda, right? I mean, the whole thing was just, you know, was just completely despicable. I mean, you know, watching the, you know, the level and quality of, you know, the evidence that they were trying to put forward, you know, as being persuasive when it was just clear bullshit, and there was no other word for it.
I always find that the people that cry that you can't use anecdotes are always the first to use anecdotes.
Oh no, I cross-examined them on this too, because of course that was one of their favorite things during these cases was to say, you know, because we pointed out, and I was writing about it at the time, that they would only ever sort of introduce NPIs when you're on the back end of a COVID spike, right? So the virus, whatever spike that you're dealing with of the virus mutation was already going down on the downward slope, right? And then they bring in the NPIs and then claim that the NPIs were what caused the downward COVID spike. So I was, you know, cross-examining one of their witnesses on this, and I said, okay, well, you know, so I said, let's go back to August of 2021. I said in early August of 2021, you guys brought in the mask mandates. And then I said in early September of 2021, Delta wave COVID started its upward spike. So I said, you know, isn't it fair to say that there's, you know, that there could be a link between you bringing in the masks and the growth of this, you know, the growth of this Delta wave spike? Oh no, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's like, correlation does not equal causation. Well, it does when it's the opposite, right? Yeah. I mean, that was their you want to talk about a trope, right? Correlation doesn't equal causation. And that was the other one too. Like, you know, if you remember the rainbow graphs where you could see this really strong correlation between vaccines being given to people in their 80s, between first shot, second shot, between day 5 and day 8 after getting those shots, there's this big death spike that was showing up in the Alberta data, right? And then when, I think it was Alex Berenson, but somebody internationally pointed this out, then Alberta's response is to scrub the data, right? Not to, and this is, you know, and of course I'm cross-examining on this, and one of their witnesses, and I said, well, you know, couldn't you say that there's a very strong correlation between, you know, frail people being given the vaccine between day 5 and day 8, and, you know, in a exponential increase in senior citizens' deaths? Oh, well, correlation doesn't equal causation. And it's like, okay, right? But correlation might not equal causation, but it certainly requires investigation.
Yeah, well, right? Yeah, I mean,
right?
Now you're talking what you're talking what I've been doing for the last, what I did for 3 years.
100%. I know that I've been obviously following your work, right?
Yeah.
And of course, but that's the whole thing, right? But rather than investigating this and saying, hey, we have a real problem here, right? The instant reflex instinct of AHS is to scrub the data and to try to bury the data, right? And even
search for data that supports their case. I mean, I remember.
No. They're just trying to bury it, right?
They suppressed it, Clyde. They literally, like, it disappeared. I mean, and in fact, I'll say this: wow. Alberta had some of the best data collection. We had beautiful data. Our data was so beautiful that our data was used by other jurisdictions to stop the insanity. Other jurisdictions looked at our data and said, hey, we got to stop injecting kids. And then we have the data and we couldn't draw the same conclusion. We suppressed the data. It's crazy.
No, and to this day, and that's why I maintain to this day there needs to be a public inquiry in Alberta, because all the bureaucrats are still hiding and burying this information. People that I know that are investigating this and are, that are trying to get to the bottom of it are being stonewalled every time they turn around, by AHS, by, people in Alberta Health, by people that have access to the data. Oh, we can't give you that data. Oh, no, that would have the possibility of perhaps, identifying individual patients, and that's against the law. And it's like, well, no, wait a minute. Like, all we're asking for is, this data set in and around this and that. We don't need any names attached to it. We just want to look at numbers. Oh, no, we can't give you that. Right. Well, the data's there, but they won't let you have it. Right.
I requested some of that data through a Freedom of Information request, and I was basically told, we can't release that data. Nobody's intelligent enough to interpret the data. I'm like, that's not your call, man. That's not your call. Like, you give us the data and let us interpret it. So anyways,
an emergency happened at the Wrath House. No.
Yeah. Hey guys, sorry. I've got to actually go offline here for 2 minutes. If we're going to carry on, I'll be right back.
Actually, we're kind of done. I think we're going to wrap it up because it's been 3 hours. So yeah.
I've got a dog ringing a bell to go outside, so I need to get up before something bad.
No problem. You go get that. Marty and I will finish out the show.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you guys, and thanks for doing the Lord's work. We're really happy to talk to you guys anytime you want me back. So
likewise, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay. Over and out. Thank you. Over and out. Thank you guys. Good night.
Cheers.
Okay.
Oh, that's so great. That's great having Jeff on the show for this.
He's one of those guys. It's just a depth of knowledge, right? I mean, you can, like, he can talk. I love meeting people who are in the thick of things, right? Like, he is in the thick of things.
Very Absolutely. Much so. Very much so. Suing both the federal government and the provincial government of Alberta. That
not for the first time. He's done it many times. I'm sure he stands there and some of the lawyers are going, "Oh God, Jeff again."
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So we got a couple of more super chats we're going to clear out here. Moonglow with a $2 super chat says, "Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. I appreciate it." Winiska with a $20 super chat. Great talk, guys. Always love your show, Clyde. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And it's great. It's a pleasure to have Marty as well on a Friday night. Usually like because we'll talk all night if we could. But we always try to cut it down to under an hour for the Thursday morning show. So yeah, it's always great to have you, because then we can just riff. It's a lot of fun. Solar member for 18 months says, "Jeff, please come back soon." I'll make sure he gets that message. Absolutely. G Meister with a $5 super chat says, "I don't think she was incompetent. I think she went along, and that's why she got over 250K bonuses. It pisses me off. Sorry, not sorry." Yeah, sorry, not sorry. I get it. I get what you're saying there. It's insane. One of the data points that I wanted to bring up was the fact that COVID was one of those things where like nobody even knew when they had it. It's such a dangerous pandemic that they had
a disease so dangerous you need to be tested to know you have it. Yes, that's what they said, right?
They were testing wastewater because people weren't even forthcoming with their PCR tests anymore. Yep. They were testing wastewater. That's how delusional these people were in the midst of the COVID crisis. It was a government crisis. I'm tired of calling it a COVID crisis. We had a government crisis where the government felt that they had the authority to stop us in our tracks in our daily business and infringe on our rights. It was a government crisis. That's what we had.
I mean, I like to, just adding to that, they created a term. They said it was a asymptotic disease.
Asymptomatic.
Asymptomatic. Yeah. A disease with no symptoms. I'm like, well, that's weird, right? Like, Marty, you're unhealthy. Okay, what's my symptoms? Well, you don't have any. Okay, so how do you know I'm unhealthy? Like, fuck. Sorry, but yeah, asymptomatic. Like, okay,
asymptomatic.
Yeah, imagine somebody brought a car to your shop, Clyde, and said, you know, I need my car fixed. And you go, okay, what's wrong with it? What's the symptoms? Well, nothing. I just need it fixed.
I have an asymptomatic issue.
I have an
my
asymptomatic car. You'd be baffled, right? Yeah. Anyways,
occasionally you do.
if I were you, I'd say that's fine. I'll fix your car. Take the car for a couple of days, give it back to them, and charge them $300. That's
you know, there is a type of customer that's like a hypochondriac. There's a symptom.
the equivalent in the mechanical world.
Yeah. It's like an equivalent, but it happens often. It's usually after a repair is done, people become hyper aware of clunks and noises and all these other
vibrations.
things.
Yeah.
And then they come back. It's usually a comeback, and they're like, well, ever since you repaired my car, ever since you know, fix the door hinge, all these clunks and bumps and noises are happening. And it's like, that's the phenomena. It's people spent money and now they're ultra aware.
Ever since you fixed my car, when I hold the steering wheel straight, the car goes straight. Yeah.
I did that. You're welcome. People are weird. People are strange, and they have all kinds of strange behavior, and that's the thing. Marty, thanks for coming out on a Friday night. This was awesome. This was fantastic. And I want to thank everybody out there for joining in. We've got about 600 people that are still hanging around after 3 hours of live streaming. So that's quite a feat. Everybody, pat yourself on the back. That's pretty great. I want to thank you all for coming out and enjoying this one.
Okay. Good night, folks. Cheers, everyone.
Good night. Keep on trucking. We'll see you Monday.
All right.